Chapter 974. Hell, the quiet zone, the land of dreams. In the stone room that had returned to silence, a few dark figures quietly looked down at the broken sarcophagus and the incomplete body inside. It had lost all its water and turned into a crooked and shriveled corpse. Most of it had already collapsed into dust. Only the inside of the cracked skull, in the darkness, there was still a faint flash of light. Accompanied by the sound of the door opening, Mathers, who was supporting himself with his cane, slowly walked in. His footsteps were a little staggered, and the huge crack in his chest had not been completely repaired. Seeing Woodman's corpse, he paused for a moment. Is he really dead? After being attacked by Vitali, even if he isn't dead, he should be crippled, right? Yi Ji shrugged. Even if he can still survive, with his remaining strength, he shouldn't think about stirring up trouble everywhere. Fortunately, I ran far away. Otherwise, if I was caught by the old man, I'm afraid I would have to accompany Woodman. Do you want to search for traces of the day-night mirror? Mathers asked. After leaving the Russian Federation's genealogy, I don't know where Russell will hide it. It might not be easy to find. His backup is still there. Vitali can't kill him, so he can only imprison him. Among the dark figures, a low voice suddenly sounded. It was the sound of the land of dreams. Let him be quiet for a while first, so that he won't run around every day. It's so annoying, and it's so annoying to see him. The voice said, next is the War of the Worlds. I will find an opportunity to destroy the day-night mirror. Mathers shrugged helplessly. Now that things had come to this was the only way. No one had ever thought that someone would be able to secretly awaken the day-night mirror that had been silent for so many years. They also didn't expect that Woodman, who was originally the strangest among them, would fail twice in a row in a ditch called Huaishur. The first time was fine, but the second time, he was gone. Now, as a mimetic virus, Woodman could freely travel between a modern realm, the border, and hell. Relying on the memes left behind in many people and ancient books, he could be said to be everywhere. Even if he killed all the people who had been implanted with his memes, as long as he spread some ancient books, he could spread again. It could be said that he had no weaknesses. Now, all the memes were still there, but the server that represented Woodman's consciousness was being pushed away by a guy who repaired the air conditioner at the door. By the time they realized what had happened, the server had already been moved back home by an old man who collected junk to play with his grandson. It was too late to catch up. This was the most dismal thing in the world. At the end of the day, who could have imagined that the disheartened Russell in the past would suddenly become so fierce after being injected with chicken blood? It was as if one day, the daughter of the god of war, who had been sold into a brothel, had suddenly punched the 100,000 soldiers who had come to help her improve her performance. Sorry, I was faking it. I have been waiting for this day for 70 years. In the blink of an eye, the old hen turned into a duck. Even a version was different. Who could they find a reason with? Now, no one would regard Russell as a clown who overestimated himself, just like how no one would treat the disaster sword as a gigolo who sold his face. The reconstruction of the celestial genealogy was almost a foregone conclusion. To the Golden Dawn, this was no longer a disease of the scabies, but an out-and-out mortal danger. As the remnants of the utopia, the fate between them had already been decided. They would fight to the death. It could be foreseen that in the coming War of the Worlds, there would be many times when the two sides would wrestle. Everyone had to be on guard. Mathers pondered for a moment and asked again, Woodman is gone. What about the part of the plan he was in charge of? Leave it to Edward Witt, the voice said. When necessary, how about Bennett assist from the side? The evil enlightened one, with the prayer beads in his hand, nodded slowly and had no objections. This is the first time I've done the work of a messenger. The solidified one named Edward sighed softly and put on his cloak. I'll do my best, but it's best not to expect a temporary worker to do excellent work. Just do your best, the voice said. But with every bit of hard work, there will be results. I'll do my best. Edward's expression became more and more helpless. Although he was unwilling, he did not say anything more and turned to leave. Where's the heretic king? Bennett asked. How are his injuries? He's recuperating in the sweet dew pool. His foundation has been damaged, but there aren't any serious consequences, the voice said. "He's just resting for a while. Time is of the essence. During this period of time, I need everyone to be conscientious in their duties. Double the hardship, double the hard work." Quoting Shakespeare's lines, Mathers sighed softly. Who would have thought that we'd have to work overtime in hell? The impromptu meeting came to an end. When those figures gradually left, Mathers remained where he was, holding his cane. In the long silence, he did not speak. He quietly looked at the tragic appearance of his companion. With a wave of his hand, he sealed his body in the sarcophagus again, waiting for the future. "Wit, are you still there?" he suddenly asked. "I'm here." The voice of the land of dreams came again. The ruler, who had long become one with this moving reality, spoke again. His voice was eternally calm. "What's the matter?" "The last message that Woodman sent back, was it true?" Mathers asked seriously. "Is the Book of Destiny really not in the ivory tower?" "No, that was Russell's lie," Wit replied. "After receiving the news, I've already activated the Dead Sea Scroll once more and obtained an accurate result. The Book of Destiny is indeed in the ivory tower. There's no mistake about it." Woodman was deceived. That was a trap that Russell had carefully prepared for us. I even suspect that Russell might have already obtained the Book of Destiny's approval. Mathers' expression suddenly changed. "How likely is that?" "More than 80%, Wit said decisively. "The remaining 20% is due to the limitations of our current information. We cannot rule out other reasons, but no matter what, the Book of Destiny is in his control." Mathers was even more confused. He asked, "But why did he lie?" "Because he likes it," Wit said. "How do you know what he's thinking?" For an opponent like Russell, no matter what he says or does, it might be an illusion or a lie. He can even hide his true advancement, so it's meaningless to trace the reason. You just need to do what you should do. "No matter what he says, it won't change our plan," Wit said. "This is the best way to deal with him." But since he has the Book of Destiny, Mathers' expression gradually turned gloomy. He could no longer avoid this possibility. Putting aside the enormous authority that the Book of Destiny had over the revision of events, what was even more frightening was that the Utopia's inheritance had over 400% of the revision value. That was the great result of saving the world from hell 4 times. Today, although the Utopia no longer existed, the countless results it left behind were still constantly creating more and more changes. The revision value was probably still rising. If Russell could really rebuild the celestial genealogy, or even complete the rebuilding of the Utopia, then the power he would obtain would be even more terrifying. When that time comes, people like us will probably be nothing to him, right? Mathers said coldly. "So what?" Wit asked in return. "Are we going to lose our composure because of this? Or should we pay a huge price to annihilate him before he succeeds? The existence of the Utopia is just our past. It's not worth mentioning, and it can't change what will happen in the future." Wit said coldly. "Mathers, everyone in the outside world thinks that the 3 of us created the Golden Dawn, but you should know very well who really created the Golden Dawn. Our existence is the choice of this world. Russell can't stop that outcome from happening." Mathers' hand trembled slightly as he gripped his cane tightly. Wit, Mathers, and Woodman. It was true that the 3 of them were important organizers and leaders of the Golden Dawn, and they all played an irreplaceable role. However, in the past 70 years, no matter who it was, no one would have thought who was the culprit behind the destruction of the Utopia and the true instigator of this evil outcome. Perhaps Russell had guessed a little, but Russell would never announce it to the public. No one would believe that the appearance of the Golden Dawn came from the Utopia. No, from the will of the Astronomy Association. It came from the person who really led them on this path. After helping and pushing, covering up all traces, he sat back and watched the evil outcome be irreversible. The president of the previous generation's Astronomy Association. "Wake up, Alistair," Mathers would said indifferently. "After being silent for so long, it's time for us to do something. It's time for the present realm to witness our masterpiece," Westcott said indifferently. After a short silence, Mathers nodded silently. A deep sound came from the depths of the land of dreams. The bell rang. Pairs of pale eyes looked up. The expression of hell appeared. When they went there, they used the Rainbow Bridge as a transit station. When they returned, they did not have that kind of convenience. They had to rely on transportation. Fortunately, there was still Raymond's helicopter. Otherwise, Huaisher would probably have to take the students on a sled. It took them 4 hours to go to Iceland, transit at the border, and then take a flight in a train. It took them more than half a day to finally return to the ivory tower. What they saw was a scene of devastation. After the disaster, almost all the buildings in the ivory tower had been damaged to varying degrees. Other than the students of the School of Architecture, who could not stop laughing, everyone else was cursing. After calculating the damage and repair costs, the vice president's expression was frighteningly ugly. It would take at least half a month to restore it to its original state, and dealing with the aftermath would be even more troublesome. The most important thing was that Bennett actually ran away. It was simply a great humiliation. The most bleak thing was that he had no choice. A tall tree attracts the wind. As one of the signboards of the ivory tower, he was the best fighter on the surface, even better than Russell. Moreover, he was a time stigmata like Kronos, who once had the identity of a Doomsday Sentinel. Whoever wanted to deal with the ivory tower, he would definitely be the first target to be dealt with. Russell's priority was not as high as his. Otherwise, once he loaded, everything would be over. At least 50% of the resources consumed in the Golden Dawn raid were spent on him, and the other 50% was blown up together with the old campus by Russell. It could only be said that the character was too strong and was unanimously targeted by other players. There was no gaming experience at all. Even so, after seeing Huaisher, he still forced a smile. It looked more and more frightening. Go and rest first. We'll talk about other things tomorrow at the celebration banquet. After asking a few questions, Isaac nodded, showing a rare satisfied expression, and comforted him. Your house is fine. Mr. Krishna hid your house in Bhagavang immediately. That's good. Huaisher also breathed a sigh of relief. Although he had contacted Fong Shu immediately after changing his phone to ensure that everything was fine, the old man's vague manner made Huaisher feel a little uneasy. If he had known that Russell would play so big, he would not have moved the Chalcedony Hall back to the ivory tower before leaving, so that the old man would not be worried with him. Even if Fong Shu was fine, what would he do if his game collection and console were damaged by Golden Dawn? After learning that the dormitory area was still being inspected and repaired, Huaisher simply took the students home. You guys can stay here for the next few days. Let Anya try Fong Shu's cooking. He walked in front with big and small bags, pushed open the gate of the courtyard, and passed through the courtyard and flower bed that Fong Shu had carefully maintained. He threw the bags at the door, looked at the familiar scene, and felt a sense of relief as if he had returned home. The forest house behind was even more familiar, and he poked his head into the kitchen. Fong Shu, I'm back. Is there anything to eat? I'll get it myself. Teacher's house is decorated quite well. Anna looked around curiously. I thought it was the kind of house that eats instant noodles in the single dormitory. She paused, and her smile became curious and strange. Is it a woman? Anya, don't be impudent. Yuan knocked on her head. Teacher is still single. This. The girl was speechless. That sounds even worse. Huaisher ruffled her hair, too lazy to talk nonsense with her. After hanging his coat on the hanger, he went to the living room and just wanted to lie on the sofa and have a good sleep under the sun. But just in front of the living room, he saw the old man winking at him with a complicated and anxious expression, as if he saw the backyard on fire but couldn't speak. He had never seen him so anxious. Are you okay, Fong Shu? Are you not feeling well? Huaisher was stunned and immediately quickened his pace. But before he took a few steps, he heard the familiar melody of a game from the TV in the living room, as if someone had started Huaisher's console and played games when he wasn't there. But Fong Shu never touched that kind of thing, and usually watched the documentary channel and the Almighty Renovation King. Or could it be that some bastard touched his save file when he wasn't there? Huaisher suddenly became angry, rolled up his sleeves, and rushed into the living room. Then he froze in place, petrified. The afternoon sun came in through the window, reflecting the golden afterglow of the dark hair. On the sofa, The little girl holding the controller was staring at the TV screen with rapt attention. She seemed to be only 11 or 12 years old. The black dress was delicate and lovely. Two slender and long legs stretched out from under the skirt, resting on the coffee table, accompanied by a happy humming. Her toes were flexible and slightly bouncing. Hearing Huaishi's voice, she pressed the pause button and slowly turned around. Huaishi almost cried out involuntarily. That young and beautiful face seemed to carry an eternal smile and mysterious charm, causing others to be intoxicated. One could not see the solemnity and grace of the past. What was revealed at this moment was the cuteness and mischievousness of a girl. Her bright eyes blinked, looking at Huaishi's dull face, as if she knew what he was thinking. Her smile was proud and happy. Huaishi almost forgot to breathe. He wasn't captured by this smile that couldn't be compared with all the treasures in the world, but felt an unprecedented chill in the crisis of death. Wait, no. Huaishi turned pale with fright and opened his hands to stop her. But it was too late, because a voice full of surprise had already sounded. Full of joy and innocence, the girl in the black dress smiled and opened her mouth to call, "Dad, you're back." Chapter 975. Cairo. The hot wind blew against his face. In the open off-road vehicle, Russell raised his hand, pressed on his headscarf, and looked up at the flying yellow sand in the distance. The further away they were from the city, the sparser the greenery. In the end, except for the short bushes, there were only the buildings in the distance. In this ancient and closed country, everything seemed to have nothing to do with outsiders. The residents lived a peaceful life, day after day. Even if there were occasionally tourists from afar, they could only admire the beautiful scenery here and could not really enter their lives. No matter how warm their smiles were, there was always a cold barrier between them. Even those who occasionally went out to study or work rarely talked about their hometown life with others, although there was no difference between here and there. It was hard to tell whether it was coldness or arrogance. Self-sufficient and self-sufficient, they had little contact with the outside world and did not care about what was happening outside. Under the rule of the pharaoh, this country had lasted for thousands of years and would continue to exist. Now, the mighty fleet of cars meandered along the road and drove into the city. After passing through layers of gates, in the end, only one car stopped in front of the last square. The black-robed old man who had been waiting for a long time looked unhappy. "You're a little late," he said. "You're almost over the time. Something happened on the way, sorry. I heard about the Golden Dawn incident. You did well, but it still can't be used as an excuse." The old man did not harp on the lateness. After waving his hand, he led the way in front and walked hurriedly. "You're never punctual. Even if you don't look at the occasion, you should look at the person, right? Russell, be serious. If you miss this village, you won't have this opportunity again. You have to cherish the opportunity." Russell was puzzled. "Why are you more anxious than me? Maybe it's because I'm not a stinky idiot who always puts on an appearance of not caring to deceive others, but actually cares to death. Hey, we haven't seen each other for decades. Can't you be a little friendlier?" "No, I'm not friendly." The old man looked back at him. "If it weren't for the urgency of time, I would have hit you. 30 years ago, I would have broken your dog neck." He could feel the anxiety and urgency in his old friend's expression. "Fine, it's my fault." Russell raised his hands in surrender. "In fact, I've tried my best to keep my promise, but those bastards from Golden Dawn keep messing with me. There are always accidents, my friend, but there are some things that shouldn't happen." The high priest of Thoth, the leader of the Egyptian genealogy, said, "You'd better hurry. Hurry up. What happened?" "His Majesty is about to enter a deep sleep ahead of schedule." "I don't know how long it will be before he wakes up again," said the high priest of Thoth. "This is all I can arrange for you." "Thank you." Russell expressed his gratitude with a solemn expression. "Before returning to Egypt, I was once a member of the Utopia. If you want to reorganize the celestial genealogy, I naturally won't sit idly by. But I'm afraid this is all I can do for you." The high priest hurriedly said, "Half an hour ago, His Majesty just issued an imperial order to close the borders of the country. From tomorrow onwards, if you come a day later, I'm afraid you won't be able to enter Egypt. In this battle of the worlds, Egypt will not participate in anything other than the necessary defense. So serious? Russell was stunned. What happened? I don't know, but His Majesty naturally has his reasons for doing so. The high priest paused for a moment, then turned around and reminded him seriously, I know you like to joke, but here, it's best to be respectful. If you still want His Majesty to make a prophecy for you, I will. Luo Su nodded his head, no longer smiling. In front of the pitch-black door was the last palace of the noble emperor in this world. The tomb. The hall of afterlife after the pharaoh's death, or rather, the cage. Waiting for him inside was the 17th pharaoh named Amenhotep. At the same time, among the human incarnations of the 9 pillar gods, he was also the most far-sighted. His talent was prophecy, an established prophecy. It far surpassed all the pharaohs in the past. After combining many divinities, it could be said to be the power of absolute foresight. Whatever he said, it would definitely happen, and there would be no discount or reversal in it. There was no word game, nor any luck. An absolutely correct prophecy. An absolutely unchangeable prophecy. But the price was a distortion of divinity that far exceeded the previous pharaohs. He was a man of few words all his life. Other than a few decrees, he had never said anything else. Even so, he was forced to live in the tomb in advance at the age of 34, relying on the secret ritual in the pyramid to suppress the boiling divine blood in his body. Amidst the solemn chanting and prayers, Russell took off his clothes, washed away the dust, and changed into a long robe. Step by step, he walked into the darkness. No one accompanied him. He stepped into the huge maze alone. The deeper he went, the greater the power he could feel. It was as if a ferocious trapped beast was panting in a cage, swallowing its own blood hoarsely, enduring the pain. Solemn praises and rich incense could not whitewash the essence that was gradually solidifying. In the end, Russell even began to wonder whether he was walking in the present world or in the palace of the ruler of hell. It was even more exaggerated than that. What he had to face was the eternal emperor of the human world, created by gathering the divine power of the 9 pillar gods, the pharaoh who had struggled in the quagmire of solidification and distortion for decades. This creepy, surging darkness was not a prop that he deliberately used to mock his guests. On the contrary, it was to protect his guests. And now, after passing through the deep passageway, he finally came to the hall that he could not see the end of and the shape of. Above the heavy darkness, the dim light illuminated the outline of the throne and the thin figure. His long hair was like flowing water, winding through the darkness, illuminated by the jumping lights, making it difficult to distinguish whether it was material or illusory. It was faintly transparent. His face was blurry, and no matter how intently he stared, he could only catch a glimpse of an unpredictable shadow. There were no ceremonial officers, no attendants, and no witnesses. The weak pharaoh and Russell faced each other from a distance. A hoarse murmur came from the high platform, like sleep talk, making it difficult to hear clearly. Your Majesty. Russell put his hand on his chest and bowed. There is no need to say anything unnecessary. The pharaoh's voice echoed in the heavy darkness, but it was impossible to tell whether it was old or young, thick or sharp, just like the sound of the darkness itself. The emperor on the throne panted, enduring the pain of distortion. I already know the purpose of your visit. I will respond to your request. But Russell, you have to understand, the prophecy is not without a price. He said, the price of the prophecy is the prophecy itself. Under the long steps, Russell smiled and nodded. I will gladly endure it. In the darkness, there was a long silence. There seemed to be a distant gaze looking down. It was so cold, so indifferent, overlooking all the changes in the human world. Seeing the future. At that moment, Russell heard a voice from the future. An hour later, the high priest waiting outside the mausoleum once again saw Russell walking out of the darkness. He smiled calmly. It was as if he had returned from an outing, relaxed and comfortable. The moment they passed each other, the two of them nodded to each other in a final greeting. They didn't say anything else. The two people who once belonged to the utopia said goodbye, knowing that this would be the last time they would meet. The high priest walked into the darkness again. Russell walked out of the palace. Behind him, the palace door closed for the first time. As he left, the ship of the dead turned into an illusion and disappeared into the eternal storm and fog. 2 hours later, Russell handed over his and Marcus' passports to the checkpoint for inspection. After the stamp was stamped, the last car left the border of Egypt. The iron gates on both sides of the checkpoint slowly closed inwards. This ancient country closed its borders again. On both sides of the winding road, countless greenery gradually sprouted. The wind that blew against their faces seemed to have become gentle, blowing in the humidity from afar. Spring is coming. Russell raised his hand, put on his sunglasses, and turned on the radio. Amidst the rustling of the electric current, a song from a long time ago came over. It made one unable to help but hum softly. In the passenger seat, the sleeping Marcus woke up and quietly looked at the scenery outside the window. His mottled white hair fluttered in the wind. Listening to his muffled singing, her cloudy eyes seemed to clear up. He had returned to the bright and beautiful times of his youth. "Russell, are you very happy?" he asked in confusion. "Yes." Russell nodded happily. Looking at his beaming face, the old man asked curiously, "What happened to make you smile so contentedly?" "Nothing has happened yet, my friend." Russell thought for a moment and nodded. "I just remembered something happy. Is it about the future?" "Yes." "About us?" "That's right," Russell replied with a smile. "It's about us, them, and everything in the future. Whether it's good or bad, it's worth looking forward to, as long as there's a future." He looked back one last time at the ancient country that was gradually disappearing on the horizon behind him. He retracted his gaze. Just like that, it gradually disappeared into the distance. Overjoyed, impatient, full of joy and anticipation, he welcomed the future that belonged to him. Russell, celestial genealogy will eventually usher in rebirth. In the solemn and cold palace that was like a tomb, the pharaoh who had been imprisoned in the darkness woke up from a long dream and revealed a prophecy from the future. He said, "After you die, this was the best thing in the world. After I die, there will be no more floods." Chapter 976. Name. "Why, sure." The crisp voice answered, but it did not make the recorder behind the desk waver. As if he was used to this, Vice Principal Isaac did not even have the interest to adjust his glasses. He asked again without looking up, "Name?" "Next should be age." On the other side of the table, the little girl seemed to remind him helplessly. She sat on a chair that was too wide and large for her. Her long black hair flowed down her white shoulders like flowing water. It meandered down her dress and almost fell to the ground. Under the afternoon sun, the strands of long hair reflected a golden light, dazzling the eyes of those who saw it. "Name?" Isaac asked again. "I haven't thought about it yet. Let me think." She held her chin and thought hard for a moment. Suddenly, she snapped her fingers. "Locust Tree, Glass Crystal, Angelina Sakura, Feather Spirit, Antalya, Sorrowful Charm, Hathaway, Rosette Rose, Tear Feather Spirit Kite. What do you think?" Isaac's pen hovered over the paper, trembling slightly, but only slightly. The long list of names went on for 5 minutes without stopping, made Isaac's pen hover over the paper. After a long time, it fell again. He wrote 2 words. "Sephora Kite." "Age?" he asked again. His expression was calm and without any anxiety. He was as cold and arrogant as ever. 18? The girl continued to think, "Well, I should be 12 this month, right? I'll be 18 in a few months. It's not wrong to fill in 18 first. 18 is good, so I don't have to change it later." Isaac's expression did not change. He wrote, "Unknown." Then, without stopping, without asking any questions, he wrote, "Female," in the gender column. Immediately, the delicate and cute little girl raised her eyebrows and seemed to be angry. "You dare to assume my gender?" "Sephora, Miss Kite." Isaac tried to maintain his calm. "You already mentioned your gender in the file you submitted yesterday. I don't think there will be any omissions." "Is that so?" The girl blinked her eyes innocently and took the lead to look away, as if she was shy. "Oh, I forgot. I hope that such a regret will not appear in your future career." Isaac picked up the stamp and stamped it at the end of the document. Pa! A bright red brand was left behind. "Welcome to the Ivory Tower, Miss Hua Yuan." He didn't know why, but when he said the last few words, there was a faint sense of weakness. "Well, thanks a lot." The girl jumped down from the chair and reached out to take the folder. She asked excitedly, "Where should I go next? Are there any other procedures to be completed? I really like the uncles and aunties outside. They're nice to talk to." "No, there isn't." Isaac decisively interrupted her. "Please go home and wait for the notice. The Academic Affairs Office will arrange the follow-up for you." "That's so troublesome. How about I come back tomorrow?" "No, I'm on a business trip tomorrow." He looked outside the room and raised his voice. "Madam Zhenshi, please help me send Madam Hua Yuan out." It was rare for him to lose his original reserved demeanor and rigid rules. Only after he closed the door did he heave a sigh of relief. He felt tired in his heart. He turned back and silently stared at the backup document for a long time. He turned the wheel of the safe and then put the almost completely blackened document into the vault in the deepest part of the Ivory Tower. In this way, the Ivory Tower's Alchemy Equipment Management and even the Alchemy Research Center, Tai Academy, welcomed its new owner without any warning or rumor. At the same time, it quietly and secretly welcomed its new owner. She looked about 13 years old. She was at the most adorable age for children. Her skin was as white as the sun. Her dress was exquisite and cute, but she was loosely draped in a man's shirt. The sleeves were so long that it was almost impossible to see her pair of slender little hands. There was also an identity tag hanging around her neck that didn't match her appearance at all. She hummed happily as she walked forward. Her figure was slim and slender. Her long black hair was like a phantom, fluttering slightly in a breeze. The hair ornaments hanging on her hair also swayed, as if they were dispersing with her long hair. She flew into a dreamlike bubble. She followed her step by step, but she didn't know why, but she was distracted. It was hard to imagine that one day she would be distracted by looking at a little girl. Was she some kind of hidden, perverted lolicon? Ah, no, now she was more like a stalker, because she should have just walked her to the door, but she unknowingly followed her for a long time. And the moment her footsteps stopped, the little girl seemed to hear the voice in her heart. She turned around and looked at her. The sun shone through the gaps in the shade, making the pair of black eyes overflowing with magnificent brilliance. "You do look like a stalker." "That's right, Zhenshi," she said. "Ah." Zhenshi stiffened in place and subconsciously took a step back. She hurriedly explained, No, I was distracted. I'm sorry, that's not right." "Why? That's right. I can hear what you're thinking." The girl's smile became more and more cheerful. "I say, don't worry. Your relationship with Miss Satoko is very strong. It won't change because of my existence." "No, I'm not. I'm with Satoko. Satoko is just my—" Zhanshi's face turned red in an instant. She was frightened, but with those eyes looking at her, she couldn't say that she only saw Satoko as a little sister. In the end, she suddenly sadly found that she was actually craving Satoko's body. She was lowly. Then, when she woke up from her trance, she found that the young and delicate face was already close to her, looking at her with interest. It was as if she could see the pain in her soul. It was full of joy and evil. She subconsciously screamed and fell back. But she found that she was sitting on a bench. Before she could breathe a sigh of relief, she saw the little girl jump up and sit next to her. "Oh, this is so interesting. What are people thinking in their heads every day? It's so unhealthy. It makes a child like me blush. Coffee or milk?" "Huh?" She was stunned. "Then I'll give you milk." She took out a handful of candies from the small bag under the man's shirt and gave her one. She looked at the candy in her hand in confusion. She looked at the little girl next to her. She was obviously different from the past, but this side profile was so familiar that she forgot to breathe. She subconsciously blurted out, "Miss Satoko?" As soon as she said it, she realized that she forgot herself and awkwardly shook her head. I'm sorry. No, you're not wrong. A calm voice came, causing her to freeze in place. She was stunned. Or rather, you've only just noticed the similarities between me and Huizusuko. You're already a little too slow. The little girl took off the wrapper of the coffee candy, opened her mouth, and threw it into her mouth. She happily savored the burnt and sweet taste. In the long silence, Junshi couldn't help but jump up from the chair and exclaim, "Miss Satoko, don't worry, it's not a dream." In other words, your memories in the past are more like a dream. The little girl looked down and folded the candy wrapper. Soon, it formed a lifelike little bird. She blew on it, and it spread its wings and flapped. Unfortunately, such a structure didn't meet the standards of aerodynamics, so it couldn't take off. It could only spin in the palm of her hand. Why? Junxi's eyes widened. She moved closer and didn't care that she was being too rude. Why did you become so small? Shouldn't Satoko be the older sister? Ah, this is one of the flaws of turning illusion into reality. There's always an infant stage, which is why humans are so troublesome. The little girl who was chewing on the coffee candy calmly raised her hand and pressed it against Junxi's forehead. Calm down. In a way, I'm indeed that Satoko of yours. However, I might be different from what you think. You should have noticed it, right? The part of Satoko that's not human. In the short silence, she nodded with difficulty. She had already prepared herself for the possibility that she was just chasing an illusion. After all, she had been in school for so long, and she had learned a lot, including the existence of divine incarnations, soul reflections, and even soul phenomena. However, to be honest, Satoko was different from all of these. She came from Tangi's experiment. Through her alchemy and gifts, through Huaishi's afterimage, she condensed the incarnation of young Master Ming's compassionate divinity. Under Huaishi's acting and maintaining, it gradually broke away from Huaishi's shackles and finally formed a miracle mark. It was not an exaggeration to call it a phenomenon. Tangi gave it divinity, and Huaishi gave it humanity. Finally, through the miraculous carrier of the afterimage, it formed a reflection. In the night of Danbo Burn, countless people witnessed it and finally completed the miracle on Earth. Now, the reflection had completed its mission and had completely disappeared. It was just that Tangi and Huaishi never thought that they would leave behind such a delightful result. An interesting soul. After wandering in the darkness for so long, she did not get lost. She only saw a glimmer of light and chased it all the way until now, regardless of whether it was a flat road or an abyss, should it be called simple or stupid. No matter what, this stubbornness was enough to be admired and moved. But in the end, she still had to be told the answer. Isaac was too much like her teacher. Although he looked unreasonable, he was always too hesitant and gentle in these matters, so she could only swallow the truth and silently suffer stomachache. Because of this, it dragged on for longer and longer. But after knowing this result, what would she do? For a long time, Junshi stared at her blankly. After a long time, she suddenly whispered, "So, I may never see Miss Sakiko again, perhaps." The little girl nodded. "They're always parting in life, Junshi. You encountered a dream and woke up, so you saw the sun. But no matter how beautiful the dream was in the past, you should not stay there." The girl was silent. In the end, she could not help but tear up. "Although I was prepared, but I still feel sad. I'm sorry." She awkwardly wiped the corner of her eyes, lowered her head, and suppressed her sobs. "Don't you feel resentful, Junshi?" The little girl looked back at her and asked curiously, "Maybe Sakiko's existence is just a lie." She shook her head hard. "I can persevere until now. I can become the person I am today. It is all because of Miss Sakiko's teachings. I'm very grateful to her." She awkwardly wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes, raised her head, and seriously answered, I want to become a person like Miss Sakiko." She seriously said, "Even if she is a fake, it doesn't matter. I will never forget her." In the silence, the little girl who was scrutinizing her raised her eyebrows. Suddenly, she smiled. She happily reached out and rubbed her hair. "What a good child, Junshi," she said. Miss Sakiko's existence is a miracle itself. Now that you have received this miracle, you are walking on the path she expected. So, don't be uneasy and afraid. You are the trace she left in this world. So do your best. One day, you will also become someone Sakiko, become the light that illuminates them. She paused for a moment, then suddenly changed the topic, and her smile became mischievous. But now, you should enjoy the youth that belongs to you and Miss Sakiko. Under the afternoon sun, a gentle breeze blew from afar. Once again, it blew her long hair. She lightly jumped down from the bench, waved goodbye, and turned to leave. But when he finally turned his head, he looked at the two figures hiding behind the bushes in the distance with a meaningful gaze. She did not know whether it was curiosity or pleasure. Chapter 977. What are they doing? Behind the bushes at the edge of the square, on a bench, Anya curiously approached the fog mirror in her hand, spying on the two people not far away. In order to avoid attracting attention, she used the refraction of the glass mirror of another office building to capture the light and shadow on the other side. However, there was too much dust on the glass, making the image too blurry. It was always fluctuating, making it impossible to see their lips clearly. The wind was also fluctuating, making it impossible to hear their voices. Wow, the vice principal's student is crying. Anya elbowed her companion next to her, full of surprise. Is this the legendary school bullying? Are we going to stand up for justice? On the chair next to her, Yuan was still holding a zither bow in her hand. She sighed helplessly. Anya, did you drag me here just to see this? Is there anything else? Anya looked back, puzzled. Don't you also look like you want to see it? I'm not particularly. Yuan was silent for a long time before she suddenly remembered that it was uncomfortable to have a human-shaped lie detector sitting next to her. Particularly what? Anya curiously came over and looked carefully. Your expression that day was so scary. After knowing that teacher has a child. That's not teacher's child. Yuan subconsciously raised her voice. Yes. Teacher is clean and keeps her chastity. Is that okay? Anya rested her chin on her hand as her smile turned into one of schadenfreude. But why do you think that a man with that face of his wouldn't be fooling around everywhere? Crack. It was the sound of the string of reason snapping. Anya. Yuan took a deep breath and tried to maintain her calm. 3 more hours of practice this afternoon. Anya pretended to be surprised, but looking at her face, she didn't know why she couldn't joke anymore. However, when they turned around again, the misty mirror was already empty. Is he gone? Yuan sighed. Anya didn't speak. The fog mirror in her hand suddenly shattered. Like a frightened beast, she arched her back, the veins on the back of her hand bulging. And suddenly, a head popped out between the two. What are you looking at? The young girl leaned against the back of the bench and curiously looked at their stiff expressions. By the way, have you been following me since just now? No. Ania forced a smile and shrank back a little. She had always been fearless, but now she actually felt a little uneasy. We're just passing by. We'll leave now. Looks like he's really following me? The little girl nodded, as if she had understood. You want to protect me? How cute. Ania's expression stiffened as she nodded vigorously. Then, the girl behind the gown suddenly reached out and touched their hair, as if she was praising a child. She was filled with gratification. Good girl, have some candy. She placed 2 candies in their hands. Just like that, before they could react, he turned around and left. In a long silence, Yuan and Ania looked at each other in dismay. Yuan was about to say something when she saw Ania twist open the candy wrapper and throw it in her mouth to chew. It seemed to taste good. Soon, she looked at the candy in Yuan's hand. Yuan sighed and put the candy in her pocket. Then she reached out and grabbed Ania's collar. Without waiting for her to object, she lifted her up. Enough of your nonsense, Anya, she said. It's time to go back to class. But before she left, she couldn't help but look back in the direction that the little girl had left. She was vigilant and confused. Even if she had secretly investigated for a long time, she still couldn't find the secret of this mysterious woman. It was as if she had something on her teacher and relied on her teacher's tolerance to do whatever she wanted. But her motive was elusive. But no matter what, she couldn't sit back and do nothing. In the silent journey, Yuan bit her lips slightly, full of unwillingness. Her teacher's unwilling expression and sad look of being done whatever she wanted appeared in her mind. She must protect her teacher, but before that, she must find out the relationship between her and her teacher. Well, Yuan was also waiting for a good opportunity today. How rare. I saw teacher Huaishir in the office in the afternoon. After writing the last comment, the old professor, Anton, looked up at the young man writing at the desk opposite him. Didn't you leave long ago at this time? Are you still preparing for class? Yes. Huaishir looked up and rubbed the bridge of his nose, feeling a little troubled. He put down his pen and slumped into the chair. Anton shook his head and took a sip of coffee. Aren't you going home yet? Mr. Anton, please don't make fun of me, okay? Huaishir sighed. No matter how much you experience in this world, there are always some things that are difficult to face. You have to face them eventually, Huaishir. Anton patted his shoulder sympathetically and picked up the coat on the hanger. Remember to turn off the lights when you leave later. Okay. Huaishir slumped on the table, motionless. The old professor took one last look at Huaishir, not knowing if it was sympathy or schadenfreude. He shook his head and left. In the silence, only Huaishir looked out of the window in boredom, looking at the flying dust under his gaze. It was as if he was looking at his own ashes. Spring had not arrived yet because the winter was too long, and some people were still alive, but they were already dead. For example, he himself. The future star of celestial genealogy had drowned in the condemnation of the public before he could rise. He could not wait until tomorrow. Thanks to someone calling him Dad, Huaishir's dream of becoming a father was fulfilled. At the same time, it brought about the death of society. Before Tongyi even raised her mouth, he had already burst into tears. Before Tongji could finish her sentence, he could already feel a chill on the back of his neck. Sometimes, if a student taught too well, it might not be good for the teacher, especially when you were teaching how to chop heads. Originally, Huaishir could still explain. Originally, he could have explained. As long as he closed the door, patiently persuaded, and thoroughly proved, then he still had a chance to save his reputation. However, just as he turned his head and was about to speak, he heard the living room door suddenly open. A group of jubilant teachers carrying all kinds of gifts swarmed in under the leadership of Ms. Andrea. It turned out that everyone heard from the vice principal that you were back, so they specially prepared a welcome party for you. Were you surprised? Were you surprised? This was the climax of the tragedy. They did not listen to Huaishir's explanation at all. After looking at the faces of the two, which were somewhat similar, everyone already knew in their hearts. In less than 5 minutes, the news spread to every corner of the present realm and hell as if it was on the Rainbow Bridge. There were already people in the military bureau who began to curse. No wonder honest people like us couldn't win against the heavenly state genealogy. Those dogs in the heavenly state genealogy actually had wives. Then, half an hour later, Huaishir had already received a gift from London. The Encyclopedia of Parenting Experience, 100 Tips to Teach You to Be a Good Father. Metatron Publishing's 100th Anniversary Collector's Edition. The kind that even came with a collector's certificate. But for some reason, when Huaishir opened the book, his hands couldn't stop trembling and his bitter tears couldn't stop. At this point, the only reason why he hadn't been divided into 5 levels was because he was still too young. So young that there was no chance for him to commit a crime. An 18-year-old man having a 12-year-old daughter. This was ridiculous. Although everyone loved to hear about this kind of gossip, this kind of unreliable news could only be circulated for a few days by marketing accounts that were trying to ride on the hype. Then, it was automatically thrown into the trash with unreliable rumors such as the women behind the Prince of Paradise. Scum Huaishir holds senior officer hostage and escapes. Bastard Huaishir dresses as a woman in Ingzhou to hook up with rich people. Celestial genealogy cowherd seduces the ruler in hell. And so on. Of course, everyone was still very happy to occasionally use it to persecute innocent teenagers. How happy it was to see people in trouble, especially when Huaishir was in trouble. It was simply endless fun. Admittedly, everyone was an ascender who had broken away from vulgar interests and devoted themselves to protecting the world. But while working to save the world and rebuild the utopia, it didn't stop everyone from having some fun. All of them were pretending to be confused, which made Huaishir even more indignant. Yet, he couldn't raise his hand and chop off the head of that black-hearted woman on the spot, or cut off his own head to prove his innocence, so he could only make things worse. I hate it. Huaishir lowered his head and looked at a certain name that had been written all over the originally empty lesson plan. Every bit of red ink seemed to be tears of sorrow flowing from the heart. He couldn't help but look up at the sky and sigh. Why am I so bitter? He only hated himself for being too slow to react. He didn't kneel down, kowtow, and call for his mother. At least then, everyone could die together. Perish together. He was just one step too late and missed the opportunity. Just thinking about how he would have to face that face when he returned home made him inexplicably flustered, and Tangi began to have PTSD. The shadow in his heart was too great. It made him hesitate for half an hour on the table. Finally, he clenched his fists and encouraged himself to the void in front of him. I'm no longer a 3-year-old child. I'm an adult. I can do it. I can do it. Then, he took a deep breath and got up. He jumped up in fright when he saw the figure waiting behind him. The little girl who was eating ice cream tilted her head and looked at him curiously. Big brother, what are you doing when you're not home yet? Don't come over. Huaishir was so scared that he almost jumped onto the table and subconsciously leaned back. Also, don't call me big brother. Can I call you a stinky little brother? Tangi gnawed on her ice cream stick and jumped up to sit on Huaishir's chair. She even spun around twice. Holding her chin, she sighed helplessly. Is this what you call a nerdy person who loves to talk about things? You say that you love her, and you talk about how you want benefits all day long. In the end, when she finally became a big sister, you hide in the office and don't show your face when she comes to your company to look for you. You look around nervously and tell her not to come here because it will affect your work. Tangi wiped the corners of her red eyes. Unknowingly, her tone became as if she was accusing a scumbag. She was about to cry. Who do you think she is? Chapter 978. Who do I think you are? Of course I'm the one who wants my life. Huaishir glared at the black-hearted woman in front of him. Things have already gotten to this point. Don't you feel sorry at all? Tangi froze for a moment before awkwardly looking away. Sorry. Not only am I not sorry, but I also feel good. Also, I didn't say anything wrong. She seemed to be wronged. Logically speaking, my current body is formed from the young master of life's divinity, your incarnation, and your origin's substance fragments and soul. Apart from the fact that my bloodline is not human, everything else comes from you. In Journey to the West, the Buddha called the peacock Buddha Mother. So, aren't you a priest? In a long silence, Tangi gradually became confused. Isn't my joke funny? I've thought about it for a long time. Why didn't you react at all? Huaishir was speechless. He turned his head away and felt that tears were about to fall. Not only are you not ashamed, you're even using me as a lame joke. He couldn't live like this anymore. He had enough. He wanted to go back to his mother's home. For some reason, a feeling of inferiority arose in his heart. He couldn't let this continue. He had to be serious. He had to have a good talk with this black-hearted woman who didn't know what was good for her. After shrinking, her style was almost different from before. If this continued, wouldn't the sky be turned upside down? He had to let this bad thing who hadn't even paid rent understand who the real master of the house was. Children who didn't listen were mostly spoiled. A beating would be enough. Huaishir closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She straightened her face and looked serious. He looked up and saw a fist stop in front of him. Her slender fingers opened, revealing the chocolate inside. Do you want some candy? Tangi blinked and looked at him. Without waiting for him to answer, she opened her palm and stuffed the chocolate into his mouth. Okay, this is the benefit. Tangi smiled and asked, how does it taste? Huaishir subconsciously chewed and was stunned when he heard this. He couldn't help but turn his head and sneer. Hey, it's just average. All right, all right. I just wanted to give you a surprise. Tangi stepped on the chair and stood up. She skillfully raised her arm and placed it on Huaishi's shoulder. She sighed helplessly. I didn't expect you to bring an outside woman home. It's just a misunderstanding. Calm down, calm down. How about Big Sister take you to see my office? She leaned closer and said generously, there's so much space. I can use it alone. The office is quite big. You can even move your game console there. If you're tired, you can sleep directly. It's okay. Huaisha rolled his eyes, but didn't say anything. He saw Tangi raise her hand. Her slender wrist poked out from the collar of her shirt, and she snapped her fingers. Let's go. Pa. With a crisp sound, Huaisha's vision blurred and his feet suddenly swayed. It was as if he had suddenly fallen tens of centimeters. Only then did he realize that he was actually standing in front of a huge, gloomy park. Then his body sank, and a strange thing appeared on his shoulder. Let's go, Huaisha beast. Tangi pulled his hair. Just like in the past, she excitedly pointed to the front. She didn't care that her body shape and weight were completely different from the past. Huaisha was angry and shook hard. Get down. I don't want to. Tangi grabbed his hair firmly. I don't want to. Hurry up. Let's go. It was as if it had landed on the ground and didn't move at all. She let Huaisha shake and twitch crazily like a madman. She sat firmly on his shoulder and didn't move. Great. So you call me here because you lack a mount. Huaisha was helpless. After noticing the puzzled gazes of the people around him, he could only sigh and step into the darkness. In broad daylight, the bright sunlight couldn't penetrate the layer of darkness that shrouded the park. The thin fog was faintly surging, sealing off the countless hellish precipitates and isolating the park that was closest to the essence of hell in the school. When Huaisha stepped forward, his figure was quietly swallowed up by the surging fog and darkness. Soon, he blended into the countless flickering figures and disappeared. Only at the gate, two withered old trees once again fell a piece of incomplete yellow leaf. It was as if he was above it, and as if he was below it. In this way, Tai's miracle was completed. This was one of the true essences of alchemy. The last time he came to Tai Academy, it was when Huaisha borrowed the place and the secret ritual to cast resentment. As an important institution of the Ivory Tower, where alchemists gathered, it also shouldered the role of adjusting the depth and balance of the campus and even various secret experiments. And no matter which one it was determined that it would continuously produce a large amount of hellish precipitates, even the byproduct of miracles, disasters. A little carelessness would form all kinds of strange phenomena or nightmares, or simply attach to the experimental mice and become a mess of monsters. It was like a fish tank used to raise fish for too long. No matter how it was cleaned, the hellish aura could not be washed clean. And after the last Golden Dawn attack, the internal load of Tai Academy was almost about to explode. In order to clean up the hellish residue in the school, it was simply piled up here, causing it to be impossible to neutralize in a short period of time, triggering the hellish transformation of the area. Except for a few people in charge, not a single shadow could be seen. Well, there were still a lot of shadows that could be seen. Of course, Huaisha was among them. According to the usual practice, the solution was actually very simple. As long as they waited until the middle of the semester, they would dump all the blame on the students and be done with it. At that time, they could also hold a wave of dungeon clearing competitions or something. It was like selling college students who were about to graduate to work in a black-hearted factory, and then using this to improve their performance. With Russell's black-hearted nature, he would probably not give them anything more than a few rewards. On the contrary, the students who were dizzy with exams, competitions, and trials would start to rush to 007. However, now it seemed that the entire campus was not in a quiet state of being sealed. On the contrary, it seemed to be boiling. Countless dark shadows were constantly wriggling in the mist, and the hellish aura and hellish precipitates that were drifting away began to condense rapidly. It was artificially stimulated. Huaisha could not help but frown, and his expression became gloomy. Such a drastic change must be done by someone in the depths of Tai Academy. Could it be that someone saw the new dean of Tai Academy and planned to trip him up? A series of conjectures kept emerging in his mind. He subconsciously rubbed his fingers twice, feeling a burst of itchiness. No matter who wanted to play tricks, he did not intend to let the other party get away with it. Suddenly, a ferocious roar came from a mist. The pitch-black shadow suddenly swelled, rose, and turned into a wriggling outline. Amidst the violent shaking of the earth, it rushed towards them, madly running. A painful roar. Huaisher raised his hand indifferently, but before the shadow could reach him, he found that the rushing monster stiffened in mid-air, and then it was forcibly pulled back into the mist by a stretched-out hand. Then there was a scalp-numbing tearing sound and a wailing sound, and then there was only the sound of sticky blood surging and vague and hoarse muttering. Trash, trash, a bunch of eyesores. In the end, no sound could be heard. Only the low sound of footsteps could be heard. A blood-stained outline slowly appeared in front of Huaisher. The plastic coat was stained with scarlet, and one hand was holding a pitch-black shovel, while the other hand was holding a round ball. The face was hidden under the mask, leaving only a pair of bloodshot eyes looking back at them. Then he froze in place. Mr. Huaisher and Ms. Huai Yuan. The old man stammered, as if he was pleasantly surprised, and waved his hands excitedly. Welcome, welcome. Why didn't the two of you come? It would have been better for us to be well prepared. Huaisher frowned and looked at him for a long time before recognizing him as the manager of the alchemy instrument who had helped him forge resentment in the past. Mr. Ping? Yes, it's me. Ping Du put down his mask, and a warm smile appeared on his wrinkled old face. What can I do for you? Huaisher looked around and was puzzled. What are you doing? Of course, I'm doing a big cleaning. Ping Du raised his hands. Mr. Isaac informed me that a great master, Ms. Huai Yuan, has come to manage Tai E Courtyard. We all want to have a proper welcoming ceremony. Then, we plan to clean up. As he spoke, he picked up the spherical spray bottle in his hand and sprayed it to the side twice. Then, two tragic screams could be heard. After mixing in detergent, fragrance enhancer, and a lot of other things, the highly concentrated holy water successfully dissipated several broken, aberrated spirits on the spot. Are you guys so hardcore when it comes to cleaning? Why do you make it look like a horror movie? Ms. Huai Yuan is here? Ms. Huai Yuan, please sit. Great master, please wait a moment. I'll go make tea. Great master, please come this way. Following the usual words, ferocious figures appeared from the thin mist one after another. When the executioners who were covered in blood saw the newcomers, they showed a sincere and surprised expression in unison. They lined up and clapped their hands to welcome them. They were just sure of playing trumpets and singing and dancing. The corners of Huaisher's eyes began to twitch, and he turned to look at Tongyi, who was on his shoulder. Great master? Yes. Tongyi cupped her chin with her palm and looked down. Why? It's just a great master. Am I not worthy? It's just that because those old guys from the Stoneware Society have monopolized it for so many years, they can't announce it to the public yet. Everyone can just keep it a secret. Although the title of Great Grandmaster was shocking, it was at least much easier to accept than the title of True God, which could make people tremble just by breathing. Besides, in my current state, no one would believe that I'm a god. Tongyi casually moved her fingers and looked around, not hiding her disdain. Russell, that fellow, gave me a garbage dump. No wonder he's so generous. As she spoke, she looked down at Ping Du, who was rubbing his hands and looking up at her piously. Then you my subordinate? Ping Du nodded frantically. Tongyi did not hide her coldness. Forget it. You're too old. Why don't you retire? I'll double your pension. How about that? This. Ping Du was stunned for a moment, then quickly understood. He threw away the shovel and the spray can in his hand, rummaged in his pocket for a long time, and took out a tube of potion and swallowed it. Suddenly, a white mist rose from his old body. In an instant, his stooped body quickly straightened, The wrinkles on his face expanded and contracted, and he quickly recovered his youth. The turbidity in his eyes disappeared, replaced by a cold light and coldness, like a poisonous snake. But now, the poisonous snake bowed its head devoutly and listened to orders. It wished it could wag its tail like a dog. Eh. Tongi moved back a little and shook her head in disdain. What a pity. You're too ugly. Pingdu did not waver. I could do plastic surgery. Tongi was unmoved. Forget it. No matter how good-looking you are, can you compare my Huaishir? It's okay. Pingdu was still fanatical. I can also change my sex. In an instant, the eyes of the strange and old alchemists lit up, and they raised their hands. The group of old cooks began to enthusiastically sign up, afraid that they would be a step late. We can all change our sex. Chapter 979. Huaishir sucked in a mouthful of cold air and clutched his swollen forehead, feeling that something was wrong. Hey, you guys, you're all alchemists. Don't you have any modesty? What modesty is, I don't know. Is that thing useful? It's just a sex change. It's nothing. Yes, as long as I can go further. Even if I become a beast, I don't care. That's true. The eyes of the veteran alchemists, who had been pickled in hell for who knows how many years, were shining, and they could not wait to get down on the ground and kowtow immediately, for fear that Tongi would not want them. Hey, what drug did you give them? Huaishir turned around and asked. Nothing. Tongi calmly waved her hand. Isn't there an assessment process? I just made a few things, and that's it. Originally, I just wanted to get a teacher's title and be a colleague of my silly boy, but this group of guys cried and shouted for me to be the dean. Why bother? Isn't it good to be alive, my friend? Huaishir looked at the group of alchemists who were scrambling to jump into the fire pit and was full of pity. Isn't there another great grandmaster? Ahem. Pingdu's expression became awkward. In fact, we have invited Mr. Mikhail many times before, but he was not interested in this place. Not interested was already quite a euphemism. Moreover, unlike Garland, who was a traditional great-grandmaster, Mikhail was good at ultra-wide area alchemy and composition, and even Hell's development and research. They couldn't learn it even if they wanted to, and these things, none of them could be called safe. In contrast, the things in the Greater One Academy now were simply harmless to humans and animals. After all, it was a dangerous project that could blow up the ivory tower if it was not handled properly. As long as Russell was not crazy enough to sleep on a bomb, he would never have arranged for Mikhail to come here. This led to the Greater One Academy being like a child without a mother for a long time. Although it was an important institution, it was a younger brother compared to other places. The budget was getting tighter year by year, and the tasks were getting heavier year by year. There was no end to the bitter days. Now that they finally had a chance to turn things around, not to mention a sex change, even if they were to become hybrids and wag their tails, they would not hesitate at all. Moreover, after witnessing Lin Li's amazing alchemy skills, who wouldn't be stupid enough to not know that they had a golden thigh to rely on this time? He wouldn't leave. She would not leave even if she was beaten to death. She would stay even if she became a ghost. How troublesome. Forget it. As long as you don't get in my way, you can do whatever you want. Tong Ji shook her head indifferently and pointed at Ping Shidu on the ground. You change back. It's too disgusting to look at you like this. No problem. Pingdu nodded furiously, but the effects of the youth potion had yet to wear off, so it couldn't be removed. After thinking for a moment, he reached out and wiped his face. His originally gloomy and cold appearance was instantly smoothed out. It looked empty. It was hard to tell which one was more terrifying. Please come in. Please come in. The old men were ecstatic as they led the way in front. Your office has been tidied up for you. It's right in front. But Tongi shook her head uninterestedly. She looked around. Forget it. The smell is too strong. Hey, you, bring a chair over. The little girl on Huaishir's shoulder gave the order arrogantly, and the group of old men began to carry it out accurately, without any complaints. Within a few minutes, a row of chairs was placed in front of Tongi. Because they couldn't figure out what kind of chair the boss wanted and didn't dare to make the decision without permission, They simply brought one of all the chairs in Tai courtyard. There were plastic chairs, reclining chairs, armchairs, computer chairs, and even an electric chair mixed in. It was unknown when these were relics left behind from the border. They were covered with blood and mold, and were entangled with an unknown amount of hatred and pain. Waves of resentment rose to the sky, and it was so dazzling that people couldn't open their eyes. Why do you need so many? Take them away. Tangi waved her hand in disgust, pointed to an office chair that looked clean, and patted Huaishi's head. Huaishi could only roll his eyes and carry the boss over. But after Tangi came down, she didn't sit down. Instead, she seemed to be waiting for something. She patted the chair and looked back at Huaishi. It was as if she was looking at a leather cushion in the wrong position, waiting for it to return to its rightful position. Hey, don't go too far. The corner of Huaishi's eyes twitched again, and twitched again. Then, he looked away and pretended not to see. Absolutely not cooperative. Then, his vision blurred, and he appeared on the chair out of thin air. Then, a light body jumped onto his knee and happily adjusted to a comfortable position. Her elbow rested on Huaishi's arm, as if she was very satisfied with the quality of the armrest. Huaishi rolled his eyes and sighed helplessly. Can't you act like a leader? Am I not very dignified? Tangi asked, puzzled. If you don't believe me, ask around. Who doesn't think I look like a leader? Isn't it dignified? Dignified. Too dignified. It's simply more dignified than the heavens. The old men, lining up on both sides, began to sing praises. Each of them looked like they were possessed by lizard men. Their small mouths were smeared with honey. Just the leader's leather cushion alone could be praised with 8 million words. This was really *king enough. Huaishi knew that he couldn't count on these old fellows who had already become alchemists. He shook his head and sighed. So what's next? I don't know. Tangi blinked and asked curiously. As the leader, shouldn't I say something first? Welcome, welcome. Ping Shidu took the lead, and the 2 rows of old cooks began to applaud enthusiastically. But this group of old men is too boring. There's really nothing to say. Forget it. Tangi shook her head regretfully and immediately thought of something interesting. Her eyes lit up. Anyway, it's a rare opportunity. Why don't we make a secret summoning ritual and catch some ruler to kill and celebrate? That's enough. Huaishi was so scared that his face turned green. My students are still here. What if 1 or 2 of them are missing? There seems to be something wrong. Tangi seemed to have discovered something. Her smile became full of interest. So, your first reaction is not that you can't do it, but that you want to transfer your students first? Huaishi rolled her eyes so hard that they almost reached the sky. Can we talk about serious business? Wasn't that serious business just now? But since you think it's too exaggerated, then forget it. Tangi smiled and rested her chin on her hand. She glanced at the old cooks on both sides. As the new dean of Tai Academy, I have to prove my ability. Moreover, the house is too small for me to live in. She paused for a moment and suddenly said, Huaishi, hold my shoulder. Huaishi was stunned. He thought she was playing a trick on him, but from her teasing tone, he smelled a hint of seriousness. He sighed. He raised his hand, passing through her long black hair that was as cold as water, and pressed on her shoulder through her shirt. It was cold to the touch. Like this? He asked, a little harder. Tangi said, hold on tight. After all, this young body doesn't have enough strength. Of course, it's best to hold on, but you'll be embarrassed, right? She looked back at Huaishi. Huaishi looked down at her. He clenched his fist and exerted force. It was as if he was crushing her shoulder, but she seemed to feel no pain and smiled softly. She just smiled. In this way, a blazing red light emerged from between her fingers, like an octagonal sharp slender awl. The moment the sharp crystal appeared, it caused the whole Tai Academy to shake and tremble. The secret instrument that shrouded the outer layer wailed and was on the verge of cracking. Everything turned into bubbles. Only this thing was real. God. God. Ping Du's eyes widened. God's wedge. But under those 2 pairs of dull and indifferent eyes, his expression suddenly stagnated and he closed his mouth. Then, a terrifying wind pressure rose out of thin air. because the god's wedge at her fingertips was slightly twisted at an angle, as if the whole world was also turned upside down. It was violently twisted by an invisible force, setting off a mournful tornado. In an instant, it spread out. The tyrannical pressure fell from the sky, pressing all the alchemists who dared to raise their heads to the ground, coldly ordering them to kneel, crawl, and kowtow to God's power. Then, a faint light illuminated Tangi's open and closed lips. She said, "First of all, let's have some light." In her hand, the pen called God's Wedge fell towards the dark Tai Academy, stirring up the lake called reality and setting off a terrifying vortex. At this moment, Huaishir unexpectedly smelled such a familiar aura from the God's Wedge. Unbelievable. It seemed to be the first time in his life that he cast the sacred mark. Under the guidance of Tangi, it was smelted with silver and lead and shaped into an outline. It was a writing object that matched the Book of Destiny. It was a branching matter. Now, the moment the order from a supreme being fell, the darkness that filled the entire Greater One Academy suddenly surged. Countless cracks emerged from the earth and the void one after another, forming a series of loud roars. Then, the darkness of nothingness began to boil, surge, and shrink. It was pulled by an invisible vortex, converging towards that point. Under Huaishir's feet, the ordinary-looking office chair had already issued a sad cry, unable to bear the burden. It was full of cracks, but with the will of Huaishir, it quickly healed. What was more terrifying than this was the power that burst out from his arms. It was as if he had reached out and pressed down on an erupting volcano. Terrifying heat emerged from the slender body, trying to break free from his hands and break free from the shackles. His hands and even his arms were burning with sizzling sounds. She was not joking. If Huaishir had not held her down, the remaining power that leaked out would certainly have crushed everything around, and even this young body would have been overturned. And now, in the storm, Tangi's long black hair had gradually lost its color. It was as thin as a dream, drifting, growing rapidly, and being ignited. There were wisps of red flames emerging. "Look carefully, Huaishir. This is what you'll be using very soon." At that moment, he heard Tangi's whisper in his arms about the construction of the heavenly palace. The roar of the heavens breaking erupted. The sealing mystic instrument that enveloped the entire Imperial Academy shattered. But in the midst of the ear-piercing alarm, there was no abyssal sediment gushing out. The terrifying calamity that was enough to lower the entire hell by several levels had now been completely contained. In the small vortex in front of them, a palm-sized black ring was formed. The crystal of disaster that had already condensed into a material state was flowing rapidly like liquid along the small ring, demonstrating this terrifying power with a speed comparable to that of a ray of light. It was the entire hell that was suppressed within a foot's reach. Then, when a wisp of fire emerged from the middle of the ring, it was born out of thin air, glowing with a dreamlike brilliance, constantly changing, as if it encompassed everything in the world. As the god's wedge was raised, it slowly rose with the black ring and hung in midair. "What is that?" Huaishir stared intently, ignoring the stinging pain in his eyes. "It's just some consumables, not worth mentioning." Tangi pressed his wrist, her slender fingers covering the back of his hand, and told him, "Next is the main point." Chapter 980. At that moment, the flames in the dark ring silently spread out, unfolding in thousands of threads, entangling in the turbulent liquid disaster, and then from the outside to the inside, everything was penetrated. Thus, hell was ignited. Under the will of the god's wedge, the disaster endlessly transformed, rubbing against each other, and radiating waves that were enough to make the Tai Academy tremble, condensing the disaster into charcoal, turning the depth into a furnace. Now, the flame was ready. The color of gold and iron spread under Tangi's fingers, and under her control, the casting furnace was activated out of thin air, driving Huaishi's soul into it. When Tangyi raised her finger, Huaishi also raised his finger. When Tangyi opened her eyes, Huaishi also opened his eyes. In this resonance based on fate, Tangyi's will dominated his will, pushing his soul to quickly spread out, and then he stretched out his hand. He grasped the burning ring of hell in front of him. The iron fingers closed, and hell shattered with a sound. What flowed out from it was dancing and surging flames. Monstrous waves swept out, but under the control of the casting furnace, it turned into a breeze. All the heat was tightly held between the 5 fingers. It formed a high temperature that seemed to melt the soul. Bitter pain and unprecedented clarity acted on his consciousness at the same time, as if it was ignited and lifted to a high altitude. When looking down, all the details were clearly visible. None of the changes could escape his senses and eyes. Everything in the mortal world was like dust. A soft whisper sounded by his ear. Slender fingers guided his palm, and he clenched the blazing power tightly, telling him, "First, you have to lay a foundation." At that moment, the 5 tightly clenched fingers opened slightly, grabbing at the ground under his feet. The earth rumbled, and a terrifying shock spread out, enveloping the entire ivory tower, causing the border to be shaken. Then, a high-pitched cry came from the darkness. It was the metal framework buried deep in the earth, roaring and roaring. As if it had come alive, the heavy soil hidden in the deepest part of the ground was rapidly rising, tearing apart the roots of the plants, destroying the decaying framework, filling up the holes, and repairing the rock stratum. In the end, it forcefully propped up the countless buildings buried underground and brought them to the surface of the earth from the darkness that never saw the light of day. In the astonished eyes of all the onlookers, they only saw countless dust and soil flying up. The haze that covered the sky was blown away by the storm, and the Greater One Academy that was hidden underground unexpectedly rose up out of thin air. And at the highest point on that ordinary-looking chair, there was a figure who seemed to be embracing the scorching sun, holding endless flames in his hands. It was so familiar. Then, adjust the 4 seasons and erect the axis. Huaishi's heart was filled with boundless comprehension as he muttered those words. He slowly flipped his palm and curled his fingers. The sound of the earth cracking could be heard incessantly. Massive amounts of calamity energy surged out of the casting furnace. After undergoing a divine qualitative change, they turned into rays of light and fell to the ground. Then, metal pillars broke through the earth from the darkness, like giant trees, rapidly growing into the sky amidst the sharp sounds of steel rubbing against each other. A total of 81 pillars surrounded the Greater One Academy, forming a prison and re-establishing the boundaries. They soared straight up and connected with the sky. Passing through the will of the Creator, they actually connected themselves to the framework, once again occupying the original position and authority of the Greater One Academy. Thus, the foundation of the sky was established. A mighty sound echoed from the Greater One Academy, shrouding every inch of the land. It combined all the power in one place, revealing the shadow and embryonic form of the towering city watchtower. It was a completely different method from everything Huaishi was used to. It was a domain that he had not been able to touch even with his constant research and exploration. It was different from the ultimate that connected and contained everything in it and then formed a whole. Instead, it was a method of control that relied on all the power and meaning around him, turning everything into his appendages. All things revolved around him. This was the method that truly belonged to Yin Zhongjuan, and its foundation was the Heavenly Palace, which was completely different from the ultimate. One was the blue sky, and the other was the yellow spring. It corresponded to the foundation of all things and the peak of all things. Did it rise from the ground or fall from the sky? Under the guidance of Tangyi, his soul was immersed in this change, and his perception followed the resonance, spreading and flowing into the Greater One Academy that was undergoing drastic changes at this moment. He experienced a completely different feeling from the past. With the growth and spread of countless iron and stone, the gloomy Greater One Academy was rebuilt under the sun, and then a huge alchemy equipment was connected to it. More than 100 furnaces, 71 laboratories, 2 large workshops, and even countless intricate pipelines and connections inside were broken and reorganized. After replacing the old network, a new cycle was formed. When everything that had been scattered gathered together once again, what it understood was a vast and mighty sound that caused this soul to tremble. All things surrendered at his feet, offered their power, and held it in his hands. Thus, the 10,000 feet tall watchtower rose from the ground, and the brilliant heavenly palace was displayed here. This was the authority that belonged to Yun Zhongjuan. After a long time, when Huaisha finally opened his eyes, he still couldn't believe what he had just felt. But in front of him, the Greater One Academy was no longer what it used to be. Instead, it had turned into a building hundreds of meters high. The whole body was cast from metal, and under the illumination of the setting sun, it reflected the iron light and was as smooth as a mirror. There were no windows or doors. It was like a giant pillar that grew from the deepest part of the earth. Standing proudly on the border, it showed its unparalleled sense of existence. This was the alchemy mechanism that was reconstructed in the style of the Heavenly Palace. The new Greater One Academy. At the top of the tall building, Tangi stood on the edge of the tall building and looked down quietly. The strong wind blew her hair up like floating bubbles. To be honest, your aesthetic sense is really strange. This straight up and down appearance, without any sense of design, is very compatible with your straight appearance. She sighed and said, although the materials are ordinary and the design is equivalent to having no design, it can still be used for the time being. At least it's much more convenient than the basement. How is it, Huaisha? How do you feel? Huaisha sat on the chair, dazed for a long time, and then went limp. After a long time, he finally had the strength to rub his face, only to feel a wave of sleepiness and emptiness. He felt that his body had been hollowed out. He couldn't even stand up. He finally knew why Tangi asked him to sit on the chair. This feeling, I can't describe it. He rubbed his face, trying hard to sort out those thoughts and experiences, but he found that the more he wanted to describe it with words, the thinner and more ethereal the experience became. There was no way to describe it. Everything just now was just a rehearsal for the construction of the Heavenly Palace. Just like how the ultimate ruin was to Great Si Ming, the Heavenly Palace was also Yin Zhongjuan's core focus. Every ascendant's ultimate and Heavenly Palace were completely different. For example, Huaisha's ultimate focused on its sturdiness and large capacity. In addition to providing shelter for a large group of people, it could also be used as a safe and cage to restrain some dangerous objects. There are also specialized ultimate ruins that could be scattered into a number of small burial grounds for a large group of people to use. The same principle applied to the Heavenly Palace. Ying Fangzhou's Heavenly Palace focused on unparalleled destructive power. It was built with the help of his only large group of kunpings. The internal structure was divided into yin and yang through a special transformation of origin substances, and countless electrodes were created in the clouds through a secret mechanism. In the end, the result was a vast expanse of lightning. At this moment, the heavenly imperial palace that Tongji had set up was just a casual creation based on the structure of the Greater One Academy. It formed a large alchemy workshop that integrated all the instruments within. Huaisha's ideal structure was based on the Twilight Village and the Eternal Frost Furnace's structure, maximizing the effects of the sealing hand and forging furnace. However, he still didn't know how to construct it. It's not difficult for those who don't, but it's not difficult for those who do. You just have to remember this feeling. Tangi said calmly. In any case, this is just for you to practice. When you truly construct the Heavenly Palace, you'll have experience and won't be flustered. You also need to speed up your progress. Why sure, it's already been a year and you haven't advanced much. Don't disappoint Big Sister's expectations. Huaisha spat out a mouthful of blood. What do you mean by a year and I haven't advanced? Is a young master's fate not considered a great master's fate in your eyes? If these words were to spread, who knew how many ascendants would cry in the toilet? Compared to other ascendants, Huaishur, who had reached the peak of the 3rd tier and the 4th tier in 2 years, was already advancing at a rocket speed. However, calculating the time, it was about time for him to advance. After delaying for so long, the 2 major items, the National Slayer Crown and Heaven's Inquisition's Divine Mark, were already prepared. If he didn't advance, he could only look at them every day. After killing Liu Baiyin, the heavenly fate that had been passed down to him had all returned to him. Now, Huaishur's accumulation could be said to be unprecedented. For others, the gap between the 3rd and 4th tiers had already been easily crossed when young master's fate became great master's fate, not to mention the qualitative change of divinity from Baldur. The most difficult item, the reflection crystal, was also completely solved. Now, all that was left was a material that contained the divinity of the ocean, as well as a suitable venue and secret ritual. However, he wasn't in a hurry at all. After being the organization's tool for so long, it was time for the organization to give back to him. There was no reason that the company didn't even provide him with food when he was already 007, right? He directly threw this matter to Russell to solve. The current problem wasn't that he couldn't find any treasures with the divinity of the ocean, but that there were too many things for Huaishur to choose from. He didn't care about the ordinary ones at all. They were all ordinary goods. It's just that it's rare for me to rest for a while. He slumped in the chair, feeling a little listless. It can't be helped. This world needs you more and more. Tongi smiled. Good luck. She raised her hands and rubbed Huaishur's face and hair hard until it looked like a chicken coop. Only then did she let go of him in satisfaction and nodded. No matter what, my family's contractor must be the best. That pleasant and expectant smile, under the soft light of the setting sun, was filled with a magnificent color that took one's breath away. Huaishur was stunned for a moment. Then he couldn't help but laugh and shake his head. Does praise count as a benefit now? Then I'll give you a hug of love, okay? No. Paying for love. There's no love at all. Where's the refund interface? Please tell me. There's no refund, only top up. Now, there's a benefit when you reach 1 billion. Just like that, during the conversation, they slowly embarked on the journey home. Chapter 981. That's great, that's great. In the principal's office, Russell looked at the tower that rose abruptly outside the window, full of gratification. Don't make any calculations. Rebuild the campus. I hope everyone can learn from teacher Huaishur. Isaac, remember to praise him in tomorrow's regular meeting. Principal, please treat your students better. Isaac replied expressionlessly. Also, Ms. Huaiyuan's renovation plan has not been submitted to the school affairs office meeting. There are insufficient procedures, and it is an illegal building. Also, the biggest problem at the moment. How do we disclose Ms. Huaiyuan's identity to the outside world? Just say that she's Huaishur's relative. Russell held his coffee cup and replied calmly. Who doesn't have a distant relative, right? The relative of a grandmaster killer is also a grandmaster. Is that reasonable? You think a grandmaster is a grandmaster just because you say so? Heh. Shifu only counts when he learns to say so. Russell turned around indifferently. We're not a listed company. It's just a change of position. Do we need to hold a press conference? Don't worry. She's always done things carefully. Nothing will leak out. Besides, isn't there still Huaishur? Just say that he did it all. Wouldn't that be the end of it? You can even gain another wave of reputation. He could only watch helplessly as Luo Su pushed his student into the pit. Isaac was speechless. After the idle chatter, Russell returned to his seat. It was rare for him to be so serious and not turn into some random animal. So, you came back in a hurry, right, after the Continuation Academy meeting. Did you gain anything? I can't say that I gained anything, but I do have some bad news. Isaac knocked on the desk, and a thick stack of documents suddenly appeared in front of Russell. It was the Climate and Environment Analysis Report of the present realm. In recent years, there were records of temperature changes in various parts of the present realm, including data on snowfall and rainfall. The appendix alone was more than 400 pages. In addition to the adjustment records of the great mystic Zarathustra, there was also authoritative data collected and verified by the Bronze Eye. Russell picked up the document and read it carefully. He skimmed through 10 lines at a single glance. His speed was very fast, and he adeptly picked out the key data. After looking through it again, he did not find any problems. But when he checked again with a suspicious attitude, he finally realized that something was wrong. He paused on the snowfall data of the Americas for a long time. Then he dug out the rainfall and snowfall data of Dongsha, Rome, and India and compared them repeatedly. It was only when he examined the table with a critical eye that he noticed a trace of abnormal fluctuation between the table and the chart. It might be easier to understand if we just look at these few documents. Isaac picked out a few items and pushed them in front of him. Under the guidance of a professional scholar, Russell finally noticed the source of the abnormality. Not only was there a slight difference between the planned and actual rainfall and snowfall, but there were also strange deviations from the normal fluctuations of the line diagram. Also, there was a slight disconnect between the climates of different regions. To be honest, this should be within the range of reasonable error, right? After thinking for a long time, Russell found it difficult to understand. No matter how you look at it, this is normal climate change. Although he was also known for his erudition and scholarship. According to the division of Dongsha, Russell belonged to the liberal arts, and he had not studied the field of scholars. It was a little difficult to look at these things. Principal, haven't you noticed that the weather has begun to warm up? Isaac suddenly asked, startling Russell. He looked back at the nursery outside the window. Some of the plants had already sprouted new shoots. Compared to the previous years, it is indeed a little earlier. Russell nodded and asked in confusion, but this shouldn't be considered abnormal, right? It's just a representation. Isaac shook his head, picked out a few records from among them, and placed them side by side in front of Russell. These are the data records that have been analyzed. I can't see anything even if you show them to me. Russell shook his head with a headache. Can you just tell me the conclusion? To put it simply, all these seemingly normal errors will cause small effects that will eventually lead to an explosive stage. After the temperature of the present realm has continued to rise for so many years, we may face unexpected changes. At first, no one cared about these small deviations that were within the reasonable range. An early heavy rainfall, an unexpected earthquake, a delay, or change in the circulation of the ocean currents, or a storm. The world was too big. Even the Astronomical Association and the Five Permanent could not take care of everything. Moreover, everything was within the reasonable range. The trial at the beginning of the year, the inspection in the middle of the year, and the comprehensive calculation at the end of the year, the 3 major inspections a year, the 6 routine tests, and even the daily monitoring. After these deviations and data structures were uniformly reviewed, they were all considered normal deviations without exception. But as so many years passed, the impact of these small deviations had become greater and greater. It was not until all the inducements were gathered together that the Continuation Academy discovered the problem they had to face. Under various chain reactions, the climate of the present realm would usher in large-scale abnormalities. According to the results calculated by the London mainframe and the 16 branches throughout the realm, the present realm would usher in unexpected large-scale floods and droughts for a period of time in the future. The scope of the coverage was simply jaw-dropping. 30% of the entire region may be affected, and most of this 30% area was covered in densely populated areas. In other words, from the results, Hell's infiltration into the present realm began as early as 5 years ago. Russell flipped through the complicated data and records and compared them one by one. When the results were reversed, he could feel the meticulousness and perfection of this plan. It was simply impeccable. It can actually exert a subtle and cumulative influence on the present realm through the 3 major blockades. Russell suddenly understood. Such an exquisite method should be the work of the Pied Piper, right? Such a slow and methodical preparation, long years of waiting, and little by little paved the way for disaster. Then, at the critical moment when the War of the Worlds was about to begin, the Astronomical Association's weakest point was struck. This kind of patience was really chilling. Russell could already imagine how angry the Directorate of Command would be after the results came out. It could be said that the pot had exploded. This was not a problem that could not be solved. In fact, it was completely within the scope of being solved. However, it could not be delayed, and they had to face it. There was no other way to avoid it. 3 feet of ice was not formed in a day. When 10 feet of solid ice appeared under their feet, how could it be solved in a hurry? In contrast, the Astronomical Association would rather find out that the rancher had quietly dug a big hole under London, intending to take a stroll. At most, everyone would just fight head-on. How could it be so torturous? Now, if they wanted to solve this problem, they could only transfer enough manpower, material resources, and time to deal with it. And even if it was solved, they would have to face the remaining problems. The tedious work of post-disaster reconstruction and dealing with related disasters. This was where the real headache came from. Floods and droughts in a wide area would leave a psychological shadow in many people's hearts due to floods and droughts, which would then leave a shadow in the Silver Ocean. And this pollution of the collective subconscious would give birth to prototypes that did not know the negative side, interfering with people unconsciously. In the end, the flow of origin substances would cause all kinds of disasters to enter an active period, accelerating the birth. Just like the locusts flying thousands of miles after a drought, the plague after a blizzard, no one knew how many monsters like the 5 gods would be born. If they did not deal with it well, there would be another chain reaction. And in this process, the possibility of the flute player not causing trouble was infinitely close to zero. At the same time, it would take a lot of effort to peel off these negative prototypes from the Silver Sea. The cycle of the present realm was too precise. Every adjustment was a huge project that affected the whole body. If they hoped to solve it through such a crude act as modifying the data, it would be the 3 major seals themselves that would be damaged, and the foundation of the present realm would be overdrawn. The gains did not make up for the losses. And don't forget, there was still the most important war of the realms. Could they still send someone to discuss with those rulers who were sharpening their knives, saying, "Sorry, my kitchen is leaking and the floor heating is broken. Let's not have a father-son game tonight." After tonight, who knew how many institutions would have cerebral hemorrhages and how many overtime dogs would curse their mothers? This wave was directly aimed at the war potential of the present realm. There was no way to avoid it. According to the preliminary analysis results, the Survival Institute has made a response plan. According to the speed of the Creator's regulation, the impact should be reduced by about 70% before the disaster breaks out, making the disaster within a controllable range. Isaac said, "In the following period of time, all hydrologists and meteorologists will be forcibly conscripted. After that, when disasters break out, at least 6 more coroners of meteorological types will be needed to participate in the regulation." Oh? Russell pinched his chin, his eyes moving slightly. "In that case, we can look forward to the activity of our Cloud Lord in the future. Let's wait for Cloud Lord." Isaac shook his head. He did not have high hopes for this. How far could a rank 4 Cloud Lord interfere with such a large-scale meteorological anomaly? At most, it would be 100,000 square kilometers. It was almost half the size of the Dongsha province. It sounded sensational, but compared to the actual situation, it was simply a drop in the bucket. This was not something that could be reversed by the power of a single person. After a short moment of thought, Russell nodded. "I already understand the general situation," he said. "Now it seems necessary that I should go to London again." "Huh?" Isaac was puzzled. Russell rubbed the beard on his chin and said meaningfully, "After such a thing happened, the landlord must be short of long-term workers. I plan to find some work for us." Isaac immediately understood. This guy was definitely going to do something again. Chapter 982. Russell wanting to cause trouble was secondary. Isaac was worried about another problem. After so many years of getting along, how could he not know that when Russell said "we," he definitely meant you? It was absolutely impossible to include him in the list. When the time came, There would definitely be a lot of troublesome things to deal with. Then Russell watched as everyone was so busy that they were vomiting blood and sat at the side drinking coffee. Suddenly, the vice principal had the thought of resigning for the first time. But it was undeniable that Russell did have the ability to influence the decision-making of the directorate. He could also accurately pick out the meat he wanted from the directorate's plate. When necessary, he could even spit the bones back into the plate, of course. He couldn't be so unlucky now. After all, he had a big family business. If he wanted the whole family to eat and live well, he could only work hard. Moreover, now that Celestial Genealogy had just been rebuilt, what he needed the most was to expand his influence and show the world his ability to take on more responsibilities. He wasn't afraid of dirty work, but he was afraid that when everyone was working, he wouldn't be able to get in. In a bad way, the flute players' conspiracy also created convenience and opportunities for them to use their abilities. Otherwise, it would be more troublesome to make a difference. This was a rare opportunity, so he did it immediately. Without even changing his clothes, Russell directly took out the suitcase from the cabinet and was ready to leave. "Get ready, Isaac," Russell finally said. "I'm afraid there's a lot of trouble in London now. I may be gone for a long time, and I may not be back before the War of Worlds breaks out. If there's an emergency and I can't react in time, I'll have to rely on you guys." Isaac was stunned. "What about the school? Aren't you doing well? You don't have to worry about the Abyss campus. Next week, Sharma will go to Ramanujan to support, and Ms. Chun will also have Yangzi's help. Moreover, I thought about it when choosing the location and specifically chose the most desolate and marginal place. Those two places are not within the scope of the War of Worlds, so no one will care if the door is locked." "What about Celestial Genealogy?" Isaac asked. Internal affairs are not decided by Isaac. External affairs are not decided by Marcus. Russell answered without thinking. "If you need strategies and guidelines, call for a meeting with the Academic Affairs Office. If you need a decision, go to the Tai Academy. If you need a tool, go to Huaishur. If we still can't solve it, I'm afraid it won't make a difference whether I'm here or not. When the time comes, everyone can just eat, drink, and have a barbecue." "What's the use of barbecue?" Isaac frowned. "Since there's no point in doing anything, I might as well seize the time and enjoy myself." Russell waved his hand casually, picked up his suitcase, and was about to leave. After taking 2 steps, he came back and gave a serious order. "Also, while Sharma and Yangzi are still here, hurry up and ask them to repair the big guy in our warehouse. It might come in handy later, but their jobs are already full." Isaac flipped through the schedule in his mind and shook his head. "It's too late. Look at what you're saying. If it's too late, then work overtime." Russell said in surprise. "We don't have rules for weekends and 8-hour workdays here. This is the startup period. Isn't it normal to work overtime until you have cirrhosis of the liver and stay up until you have a cerebral hemorrhage? Besides, you don't need to raise your salary. It's for the sake of our ideals. It's not shameful." Finally, he turned around and gestured to Isaac with a fist clenched and cheered him on. The old bastard disappeared without a trace. Gone, in the silence. Only Isaac lowered his head and calculated the workload that his 8 Time-Axis clones wouldn't be able to handle in the future. Finally, he realized what had happened. A strand of hair fell from her head, which was gradually thinning out. "Is this utopia? I'm in love." In the eastern waters of Ingzhou, the world seemed to be locked in a black box, undulating and spinning amidst the rumbling. Amidst the violent overturning, rising, and falling, there was an endless amount of heavy seawater churning on the edge of the ship and surging to the deck. The pale searchlight couldn't illuminate the heavy curtain of rain. Only a sudden flash of light in the clouds could show the ferocious appearance between the sea and the sky. Under the dark, iron-like clouds, thunder rumbled. Countless turbulent waves rose and collapsed like mountains. Every slight change triggered a series of loud noises. Mixed in the thunder, it was difficult to distinguish. The sweeping storm surrounded the surroundings without any pattern. It was like invisible giants pulling ropes, violently wrestling, but no one knew where to pull the ship that was as fragile as a withered leaf. If it was a fragile sail ship, it would have been torn apart by this tyrannical wave long ago, right? However, even the alloy cast with modern technology could not resist such ferocious power. After the usually tranquil ocean revealed its ferocious state, the power of the entire world seemed to be shrinking along with the waves, indiscriminately crushing anything that dared to intrude into this sea. In the narrow corridor, the middle-aged man held the handrail and staggered forward. He was almost thrown up by the force of the tide. The safety rope was constantly tightened, and faint sparks were produced from the friction between the lock and the handrail. Finally, he pushed open the door in front of him with difficulty. "Miss Anna, we've arrived." However, there was nothing in the cabin behind the door. Only a few teaching materials were rolling on the floor with the surging tide. The man at the foot of the mountain was stunned for a moment. He subconsciously looked up and felt a wave of dizziness. At this moment, in the violently shaking cabin, the only person who didn't change was a figure. As if gravity was defying, she sat cross-legged on the ceiling with her head lowered and focused on playing the game in her hand. Among her long blonde hair, a strand of naughty bangs broke free from the restraint and fell down. The girl's blue eyes looked up and looked at the man at the door who was stunned. It was not an illusion or something. In a moment of daze, the man at the foot of the mountain seemed to see a faint glow from within. So fast. We were so close to finishing the fight. She looked down regretfully and looked at the game that could not be paused. She could only seize the time to play the game. Then, the cat-type creature quickly sent her back to the base with a handcard. "Ah, it's really a dung game. Why don't you give me the trial version equipment and put in such a troublesome monster?" Ania was furious. She turned off the screen and stuffed the handheld device in her trouser pocket. She stepped on the ceiling and got up, easily crossing the railing and passing over the top of the mountain. "Please inform me. I'll be back soon." Boom! There was a loud noise, and the entire ship was suddenly thrown up. The sound of steel wailing could be heard, as if it had hit a reef. When a man at the foot of the mountain turned around, the girl had already stepped on the ceiling and disappeared at the end of the corridor. Her footsteps were light. Only he was stunned for a long time. He looked down at the raincoat in his hand and realized that he did not give anything away. Hey, Miss Anna, at least she had already run far away. The man at the foot of the mountain shook his head helplessly. He simply put on the raincoat and chased after her in a sorry state. In order to stay in the underworld, he was forced to be a babysitter by the boss. Or did he really have the talent to take care of children? Amidst the violent shaking, he opened the door of the cabin. Then, the storm came like a torrent, almost pushing him back into the cabin again. On the deck, the crew members with ropes were running with difficulty. Amidst the loud noise, everyone was roaring with all their might. A huge amount of seawater was drawn into the sky and fell violently, endlessly washing the deck. Even if it was only a slight aftershock, it was enough to roll up an unprepared person and blow him away. In the loud sound of the alarm, the searchlight illuminated the huge waves in the distance. The tide was like a building rampaging in the hurricane, suddenly pressing down on the insignificant ship in front of them. The hull was swallowed in an instant. It rose from the turbulent waves with difficulty. Abnormal cracks had already appeared on the deck. "No, it's about to flip over." The captain's frightened shout came from the earpiece. "Mr. Yamashita, we can't go any further. Stop talking nonsense. Did I ask you to go out to sea for charity?" Yamashita clung to the railing and climbed up from the deck like a drowned rat. He roared into the earpiece. "Are the waves or the coast police more terrifying? Bring out the courage you had when you were smuggling. If you delay things because of you, no one else needs to do it. I'll personally help you." "No need, Mr. Yamashita." In the communication, the girl's lazy voice sounded. "It's fine here. It's not far. Next, everyone can move back a little. After all, if the ship really flips, I'm afraid I can only swim back to Damboa." At this moment, on the violently shaking waves and the deck, the slender girl calmly walked among the remaining waves and jumped onto the twisted railing. In the clouds in the distance, lightning flashed and thunder roared, illuminating the dark sea sky again, and the waves in front of her. So, She stepped on the railing casually and stretched her body. She began to warm up until every inch of muscles that were stiff in the game relaxed again. Finally, she waved behind her. "Miss Anna." Yamashita grabbed the railing and shouted to her, "Please take care. Don't worry, I'll be back soon." The girl grinned and fell back. In an instant, she disappeared into the darkness. When Yamashita leaned on the railing and looked down, he saw the figure stepping on the turbulent waves as if walking on flat ground. The turbulent waves couldn't swallow her. She strolled leisurely. From beginning to end, she stood at the top of the waves. Wherever she passed, only pieces of floating ice were left that quickly broke and collapsed in the waves. In the vibrating low sound, the light of the searchlights lit up in the rainstorm, passing through the thick curtain of rain and sprinkling on the surface of the sea, making the gloomy surface of the sea shine like low-quality jade. However, under that thin layer of light, a pitch-black shadow was rapidly emerging and expanding. At that moment, the wandering white wolf grinned, revealing sharp canine teeth. It seemed to be smiling. "Found you." Chapter 983. The boiling ocean seemed to freeze for a moment. The violent undercurrents disappeared. It was as if peace had been restored. However, this wasn't the arrival of peace. Instead, something even more terrifying was rising from the depths of the ocean. It rapidly climbed, heading towards the light above the ocean's surface. As a result, a rapidly expanding shadow was outlined on the surface of the ocean. In this brief moment of peace, everyone felt an indescribable pressure and fear. A streak of mournful lightning fell from the clouds. Immediately afterwards, in the mighty thunder, the disturbed surface of the ocean shattered. Millions of tons of seawater were stirred up, bursting forth with a huge wave, sweeping through everything. Meanwhile, a thick and solid wrist had already reached out from the ocean's surface, sweeping towards the young girl who didn't hide the fluctuations of origin form at all. Waves surged again. The ocean wind whistled. The turbulent waves swept through under the wrist's slab, almost lifting up the retreating ship again. The mountain lying on the guardrail couldn't help but rise into the air and fall. Her eyes widened in a daze. She saw a slender silhouette that seemed to be soaring in the torrential rain. Under the dazzling light of the searchlight, she lightly jumped between every drop of water. Countless fine ice cubes condensed under her feet and then quickly shattered under her trampling. The used steps, which she wasn't yet proficient in, displayed a completely different application method from the little cabin in the forest in Hawaii Shore. Under the support of the Maiden of Frost's holy mark, she turned the torrential rain into a foothold. The sense of balance and flexibility cultivated from the long training in the Inquisition was enough for her to shrink to an inconceivable degree in an instant. It was also enough for her to jump as nimbly as a cat from any place she could stand on. Even gravity couldn't restrain her footsteps. At this moment, she rose into the air and landed. She stepped on that sinister wrist, freezing the flowing acid. She looked down. "This is the owner of the ocean workshop. The monks of Ingzhou don't look good. They're also a bit big. Could it be that they grew up eating nuclear wastewater?" In the boiling ocean, a huge octopus that was like a building slowly emerged. On its head, covered in scales and traces of distortion, two huge eyes shone with a terrifying light that wasn't inferior to the searchlight. Immediately afterwards, thousands of countless limbs emerged from the depths of the ocean. "Hey!" Ania nimbly turned around in midair, her hands clasped together as she pulled out a huge ice hammer similar to Huaishi's from the torrential rain and smashed it down on her wrists. Her body soared into the air again under the reaction force, nimbly dodging the entanglement of the complicated tentacles. She lifted her finger and blew a high-pitched whistle at the distant ship. "Fire! Fire! Fire!" Yamashita turned around and roared. Back in the captain's cabin, the scholar had already pressed a button. Following a series of flips, harpoon cannons rose from below and fired a barrage of heavy arrows. Heavy steel cables extended out as the arrows flew. The alchemy harpoon, covered in layers of arrays, instantly sank into the body of the giant octopus. Immediately after, a dazzling electric current surged through the steel cable. Amidst the blinding light, the solidified origin substance surged. It clearly did not have any mouth parts, but the huge sea monster let out a roar that caused everyone's vision to turn black. Immediately after, dozens of steel cables broke in an instant. The high-pressure water current swept across and left a terrible dent on the hull of the ship from a long distance away. The alarm sounded, and amidst the screams of horror, the seawater flowed backward, broke through the quarantine cabin, and poured into the bottom cabin. High-pressure water knife. In midair, Ania was slightly stunned and complained, "I was just joking. Why did Big Sister give me such a troublesome job? I hate seafood." Amidst the unhappy cries, the white wolf once again brought along a frosty wind, breaking through the torrential rain and descending from the sky. It hit the sea monster right in the head. The disaster born from the deteriorating environment screamed, its eyes spewing out a dazzling light. The smell of decay and poison spread with the light, but it was refracted in front of the ice mirror. Behind the shattered ice mirror, black flames emerged out of thin air. The flames of malice surged and shrouded the thin girl, turning her into the incarnation of the evil god in the human world. The gift from the black god shot out from her hands. Two extremely long frost swords quickly shrouded the flames in their eyes. The swords that were dozens of meters long opened and closed in the torrential rain. Wherever they passed, the curtain of rain in the sky was cut into pieces. In the blink of an eye, wounds were left on the huge sea monster's body. But those thick limbs and ferocious body were too huge. At this moment, it was as if they were just scratches and did not care. But soon, multiplying frost grew out of the wounds and began to spread. The freezing was just a facade. The real essence was the resentment that was enough to distort thermodynamics and extinguish the furnace. Now, the resentment was growing, Sea House Master roared. Finally, the lower half of his body was revealed in the surging tide. It was a deformed torso formed by flesh and blood stuck together with steel and the huge sunken liner as the skeleton. Countless phantoms of drowned people emerged from the wreckage of the liner. They danced and entangled around Anna, causing her to pause for a moment. Then the high-pressure water knife instantly swept across. The terrifying force that was enough to cut through the steel ship tore the ocean apart, stirring up whistling ripples. "Get lost!" Ania shouted. The black flames tore apart those ghosts and instantly froze them into layers of frost. After the water knife swept past, they pathetically returned to their original form. The frozen ice shell had already broken apart. Even the arms in front of her chest and overlapping to protect her face were damaged. More importantly, her satchel had been completely shattered. The handheld that was originally placed in the waterproof bag had fallen out and into the sea. She could not catch it. The handheld I borrowed from teacher. And my save, my save, my save. I almost broke his record. The girl widened her eyes in grief and indignation. The white wolf roared, "You're dead. You're dead. Do you know that? No one in this world can save you." And so, she angrily shouted the messy mafia curse language that she had learned from the small house in the forest. Black flames and white light emerged from her hands again. The love of white deity and black deity was displayed here. The frost sword extended and burst out in thunder from her hands. She slashed down. Amidst the rumbling, the huge wrist was cut in half by the slender blade. Corrosive blood spurted out, and large amounts of ink dyed the seawater into a boiling, poisonous soup. The furious white wolf had already stepped on its broken limbs and counterattacked. The two swords in her hands continuously slashed down, dismembering the sinister sea monster inch by inch. Even the barnacle-covered wreckage of the liner was cut in half by the blade. She brandished this power that was too great for her without any scruples. She did not care about the origin form that was rapidly being consumed. Anna soared into the air. She looked down at the pair of huge orange eyes that were almost within reach. Destroy, hurry up. The black flames and white light merged in an instant, turning into an undulating beam of intense light that gushed out. The good and evil extracted from countless human natures erupted after the three origin forms had undergone a qualitative change. What was formed was a stream of frost that pierced through the head of the Ocean District Master. It violently stirred and pulverized all tissues. Countless amounts of frost rapidly spreading and parasitizing the remains of the corpse. Very quickly, the disaster that was born from fear and legend was completely shattered. Anna was panting on top of the messy iceberg, wiping away the rainwater on her face. She lowered her head and gazed at the countless debris floating in the waves. There was also the broken handheld computer. Her eyes began to redden. Wah, this is too much. She patted the screen that would never light up again and muttered sorrowfully, "Save, my save." Only now did Xia, who was lying on top of the railing, finally let out a sigh of relief. He was exhausted. Even though it wasn't his turn to fight, he felt even more tired than if he had been the one to fight. A group of old men were standing behind him, letting a little girl fight. Was this really appropriate? Even though he knew that someone like him wouldn't be of any use, he still couldn't feel at ease. He should have been happy to see the sea monster being dealt with so cleanly, but for some reason, he still felt uneasy. According to the theories of the scholars in the university, as long as the newly born disaster like the Ocean District Master was eradicated, the sea should return to its original state. But why was this sea still so turbulent? Unless, in that instant, his expression changed. "Miss Anna, be careful. There's also... Anya looked up in confusion. What else? What answered her was a terrifying roar from the depths of the sea. A 10,000-foot-tall tidal wave appeared out of thin air, followed by the whining of countless ghosts and whining whale songs. The ferocious shadow, shrouded in ghostly flames, smashed the iceberg into pieces. There was another one. The disaster brewing in this sea was not just the Ocean District Master, but two. And now, a huge monster covered in pale white bones had emerged from the depths of the sea. It opened its mouth and pounced towards the girl on the iceberg. It was a mutated overlord of the sea, a disaster that once left countless shadows in Yingzhou. A whale. Again? Anna scratched her wet hair numbly. She was like a student who found that she hadn't finished a single page of her summer homework on the day before school started. She began to give up. F*CK the homework. I'm not writing anymore. Teacher, please help me. She closed her eyes, raised her head, and shouted towards the sky. I don't want to work hard anymore. So, in that instant, there was a faint sigh. It was full of helplessness. And in the midst of the black clouds and lightning, the flying steel bird looked down at all of this, its scarlet eyes reflecting the gigantic whale. Then, thunder exploded. The world was silent. The monstrous sound of the tide disappeared without a trace. Only a blazing light emerged from the end of the sky, tearing apart the dark clouds. Brilliant flames ignited, tearing apart the iron-like dark clouds, breaking through the violent winds and torrential rain along the way. In an instant, it crossed a long distance, galloping from Danbo. It broke through all the haze. In the flames, it descended between the sea and the sky, sinking into the whale's head. Then, what burst out was a sorrowful cry that resounded in the monstrous waves. In an instant, the whale's body turned into ashes. The dark clouds shattered, and the huge waves disappeared without a trace. Only the quiet moonlight shone through the broken clouds, illuminating the stunned girl. On the iceberg, the majestic and gorgeous cross spear dissipated like a phantom. Iron Crow went far away. Danbo. In the continuous rain, Huaisher closed the window. As if he had just let the wind out, he returned to his chair and calmly looked at the visitors from Looming Hall in the conference room. Where are we just now? He said, let's continue. Chapter 984. In fact, there was nothing to continue. It was just bullsh asterisk T. But even if it was bullsh asterisk T, it was necessary in many cases. Both sides were well aware of the outcome and had already expected it. However, they would still go through procedures, or rather, conventions, to do meaningless things. Just like an exhibition match, the result was not important, but the participation was important. The looming hall needed to express its goodwill to the Doomsday campus through this behavior. Of course, the Doomsday campus also needed to express its respect for the looming hall. Although it wasn't the first time that they had tried to sabotage each other in private, it could be said that the two sides hated each other. From the beginning, Huaishur didn't look at these useless snacks that were about to be rolled into a 1,000-layer pancake in the Gong family and Wu family's inner scroll. But everyone still had to put up a front. Just put on an act. Instead of spending time on such boring things, it was better to take a look at the students' practice scene. It was just that he didn't expect that the girl of the Russian Federation's fighting nation, the direct descendant of Black God, Anna, after hanging out in the forest hut for a while, began to embarrass herself at the speed of light. She didn't learn the good things and learn the bad things. Not only did she break the handheld phone she got from the teacher for free, but she also learned to shake people if she couldn't win. He held his chin and his mind wandered. He began to reflect. Did he spoil his students too much? Indeed, they were already so old. Not to mention the elements of destruction and the remnants of the world. He hadn't even seen a decent ruler. Per capita, there were no more than 100 heads. Would it be more appropriate to set a KPI? And what was shown was the mysterious smile on the corner of King Doomsday's mouth, as if he was listening attentively to the other party's opinions and views. From time to time, he nodded slightly, as if to express agreement. But he didn't express any opinions. He just looked at everything in front of him with an unfathomable expression, which made the looming hall's messenger feel more and more pressure. He couldn't help but take out a sweat towel to wipe his forehead. After making a final statement, he looked at the man across the table with expectation. There was a long silence. There was no answer. King Doomsday was still smiling, as if he was still waiting for something, but his gaze became sharper and sharper, as if it penetrated the body of the visitor and fell in a distant place. It was not until Yuan kicked Huaishur's chair that he reacted. He raised his eyes slightly and coughed twice. I've fully understood your intentions and intentions. We respect the idea of looming hall and look forward to establishing a friendly partnership with them. Together, they would work to maintain the peace and tranquility of the present realm and Yingzhou. We are also very grateful for your proposal to jointly participate in the border defense of Yingzhou. However, as a branch of the Ivory Tower, the Doomsday campus is just an educational platform. It does not have the authority to use force in the present. We respect the sovereignty of Yingzhou. We have no intention of interfering with your country's sovereignty in the past, present, and future. Bula. After 15 minutes of nonsense, Huaishur recited the draft that he had prepared in his mind using his LV-10 copywriting skills, vividly expressing the profound meaning of the words, "It's none of my business." To put it simply, what happened in Yingzhou has nothing to do with me. He had no interest in the border defense of Yingzhou at all. Instead, he despised it. Moreover, don't think about looking for honest people to take the blame for your trivial matters all day long. Annoying, really annoying. As for sovereignty, was there such a thing in Yingzhou? How many days has it been since the word American vassal state was removed from his face? The mark hasn't disappeared yet. How come there are so many people wandering around? He knew what Looming Hall was planning, even if he used his heel to think. He led Doomsday to wrestle with the Eastern Xia genealogy and play against Enfang State's smelly sister, Hupa. This game of driving the tiger to swallow the wolf was very smooth. But Huaishur really had no interest at all. Even if Looming Hall promised more benefits, it was useless. In the final analysis, the two sides saw things from different perspectives from the beginning. Looming Hall wanted to use the method to deal with General to deal with him. On the other hand, perhaps this was also a test for Doomsday, tempting with power and treating Huaishur as an ambitious person. They wanted to see Doomsday's attitude from it. But Dombwa campus had no interest in taking the initiative to expand from beginning to end. He hadn't even finished eating the food in his bowl. Why was he staring at the pot? If it developed normally, Dombwa couldn't finish the benefits brought by this wave of industrial integration and upgrading in 10 years. As for 10 years later, Dombwa would be a giant in the metallurgy industry. At that time, with a sneeze, the industrial system of Yingzhou would shake 3 times. Why was he so impatient to be used by Looming Hall now? Even if he really wanted to participate, he must find the Eastern Xia genealogy. Looming Hall, you'd better wait a little bit. Therefore, he couldn't flatly refuse, nor could he show that he was very interested in it. He had to be like fishing for a rich guy, showing an ambiguous and hazy feeling. As long as he used the rules of the Astronomy Association as a tiger skin and pretended to be very tempted but not allowed, he could fight for more rights and interests as a neutral party. These were the notes and detailed cases from Marcus, the ace diplomat of celestial genealogy. Russell sent people to organize and send over the required reading list. Even if he didn't know the details of micro-operations, this kind of thing could be left to others to do. As long as Huaishur could grasp the general strategy, he wouldn't be at a disadvantage. Now, he was using what he had learned. It seemed that the effect was not bad. At the very least, the fluctuations of the messenger's origin substance were quite interesting. The image hovered between "this might be really serious" and "you're F*** kidding me." This cycle repeated until he left. In that case, I will definitely write a detailed report when I return. The messenger of Looming Hall respectfully said goodbye. I believe that there will be progress in the meeting between the two sides soon. After the door closed, Huaishur's smile slowly dissipated and became solemn. To be honest, he was almost shocked for a moment just now. General, the Emperor intended to use this battle of worlds to choose the supreme leader of the Wu family in Yingzhou, the position of the Great Lord of Yingzhou. In fact, there were clear hints in his words. He was only short of directly saying that if Dombwa Master was willing to deepen his relationship with Yingzhou, the position of general would not be a problem. It was fortunate that the Emperor could take it out should it be said that he was ambitious or arrogant. Could it be that after sending away that American, he immediately felt lonely and wanted someone to accompany him by his bed? Huaishur only wanted to laugh when he heard this. Now that the Emperor had the absolute initiative in Yingzhou, after starting the adjustment of the convergence of gods and Buddhas, he was the complete master of the genealogy. The title of general was meaningless. It was just a name that sounded a little cool. It was no different from the relatives of the Han Dynasty in Dongxia, the teacher of defense against black magic in a magic school, and Count Glamorgan, once in the limelight, buried for a lifetime. But they were all workmanship tools. Why should he choose the utopia instead of the place where you guys fight in every corner, every day? What made Huaishur even more puzzled was, what did the Yingzhou genealogy want? They didn't hesitate to take out a bargaining chip like general. But would he take it if they took it out? Huaishur had already experienced the stupidity of the Looming Hall. But at the same time, he also understood that behind this stupidity was shrewdness. As long as they could protect their own interests, that group of guys could do anything, and they didn't mind being a fool once or twice. So, they felt that he would be swayed? No, anyone who had some understanding of Huai poetry would not take it for granted to use power to bewitch him, would they? Moreover, people with discerning eyes could now see that Huaishur was Russell's confirmed successor. It didn't take long for a detailed report to be delivered to them. What brought was a shocking inference. In reality, after piercing through that layer of frightening shell, its principle was actually very simple. It was just using the flock of crows as a transit point along the way. Every 10 kilometers or so, it formed a substation one after another, continuously transmitting this power like an electric current until it finally reached the end of the chain. The flock of crows that Huaishur personally raised would not have any burden when transmitting Huaishur's origin form, and the change of divinity would reduce the rate of consumption to an astonishing level. In the end, when the origin form transformed spear of compassion was unleashed again, This tyrannical power descended from the sky on the surface of the sea thousands of kilometers away from the pill wave. It was as simple as sending a compressed packet through a P2P transmission channel. But apart from Huaishur, no one else could achieve such a simple operation. Apart from him, no one else had such an equipment that could change between origin, form, and material at any time. Using a flock of crows as an extension of destiny and miracle was undoubtedly Great Si Ming's domain. And where this destiny shrouded, the power of wind, rain, thunder, and thunder was the authority that belonged to Yun Zhongjuan. Even though he had not yet reached level 4, Huaishur, who had already undergone a qualitative change in divinity, had begun to gradually explore and master the power of Great Si Ming and Yun Zhongjuan, and he was trying to combine them together. As long as the flock of crows was there, Huaishur could use the positioning and transit of the flock to strike a thunderous blow at any time. When Great Si Ming's range of interference and Yun Zhongjuan's terrifying execution efficiency were combined together, the result was a monster that could strike at any time across a super wide area. The attack just now was just a small demonstration of his skill. According to Envoy Sanhao's description and witness, Huaishur did not seem to be straining at all from the beginning to the end. He only pushed open the window as he spoke, then casually tossed out his weapon as if he was throwing a cigarette but downstairs. Thus, a destructive iron light fell from 1,000 miles away. The mighty crow tide was an extension of his limbs, and the land, covered by his iron wings, was within his reach. Under the observation mirror, they even saw every change in the entire process in detail. After the qualitative change in divinity, the spear of compassion turned into a surging light and soared in the night sky. It moved forward in a straight line, constantly jumping between the nodes formed by the crows. Finally, after crossing a jaw-dropping distance, it poured its fury onto the sea without any loss. A fatal blow, and what was more terrifying was that no one knew if this was his limit. If this power was used to protect the present, it was indeed reassuring. But what if he had other ideas? Even if he just sat there and did not move, as long as Huaishur was willing, even the Kokyo would be shrouded in his shadow. Just thinking about it, everyone present couldn't help but feel suffocated. They felt the invisible blade hanging high above their heads. This is really unsettling. Nan Nan lowered his gaze and looked down at the cooling tea in his cup. He sighed softly and silently. This potential, in the future, he might be even more terrifying than Ghost Fawn. No one spoke. Chapter 985. It was also late at night. In the quiet room, an old man with a white beard stared out the window at Dombua's night sky with a pitiful expression. When he saw the lights and the noisy construction site all night long, he couldn't help but sigh silently. The people's lives were so difficult. Who knew how many people had shed blood, sweat, and tears behind this bustling scene? Such a cruel rule, squeezing the people's sweat in exchange for prosperity, was really disgusting. But when a crisp sound came from the door behind him, the pitiful look instantly disappeared without a trace. He became impatient and went up to greet. "How is it? Is there news from there?" "The money has been received." The person who knocked on the door said, "We will provide support when necessary. Please go all out." "Good, very good." The old man looked down at the number on his phone, and his smile became gratified. "Very good. With such support, the end of this evil city is coming." He was obviously so old, but his expression was solemn and firm, as if he was an unyielding warrior. "We, the Wanderer Alliance of Freedom, will definitely not leave it alone," he promised. "Please tell them. Dombua will definitely be able to sweep away the haze and usher in a bright future. Even if the night is dark, the light of freedom will shine on this city." A few days later, in the old city of Dombua, the main body of Dombua in the past had now been replaced by brand new streets. The last thing left was this abandoned building that hadn't had time to be demolished. Now, this place had long been abandoned by time, and there were few people. Only stray cats and dogs roamed about, looking at the construction site in the distance that rumbled through the night. In a deserted old house, under the bright light, an old man stood on the podium and gave an impassioned speech to the audience full of hostility below the podium. Friends, when you work hard all day long, spilling blood and sweat, the money you earn is just barely enough to survive. The real fruit is wantonly squandered by the bloodless and tearless upper class to support their extravagant life of debauchery. Relying on the monopoly of potions, Doomsday Corporation is turning us into their slaves. Through the Yakuza's high-handed rule, the White Paper Man forced us to work for them, forced us to consume our lives to satisfy his insatiable greed. Relying on our blood and sweat, he built a magnificent palace, kept countless mistresses, and repeatedly extended his evil hands to innocent children. My daughter is... At this point, the old man was choked with sobs and tears welled up in his eyes. The audience below the stage was filled with righteous indignation, and their eyes were filled with anger. Everyone, let's join the Wanderer Alliance and overthrow Huai Zhi's tyrannical rule. The old man raised his hands and shouted at the audience, "Reject the dictatorship. I refuse to be oppressed." Under the lead of the old man, everyone shouted enthusiastically, "We want an 8-hour workday and normal holidays and benefits. We want to control our homeland. Open up the formula and supply of potions. Give me back my human rights. We want freedom, freedom." The fanatical shouts continued throughout the night. The drug addicts and the idlers who were attracted were immersed in the vision of freedom and hope in the future. On the roof, the huge black bird that looked like a falcon tilted its head and finished combing the messy feathers on its wings. Then it rose into the air again. Only the faint sound of its chirping echoed in the air. Idiots! Hey, did you guys notice that there are more and more idiots recently? During the weekend dinner, Weno chewed on edamame and complained impatiently, "A bunch of useless people come to the construction site every day to cause trouble. The streets are getting more and more chaotic recently." Once he said that, almost everyone started to complain. Only Oka sipped his wine and looked at them from the side. Anyway, he had retired long ago. No matter how troublesome things were, they could not affect his mentality. On the contrary, he was a little worried about other things. Hey, could it be that some kid from the past didn't know the rules and messed around? Oka cautiously reminded, "Don't cause any trouble. Boss has repeatedly said that you are not allowed to return to your old profession." "Bah, return to my ass." Weno was getting more and more annoyed. He almost crushed his beer glass. It's not like you don't know the current situation in Doomsday. Every one of them has a job, a child, or a lover. There are so many jobs that they can't finish. They are in a hurry to earn money. Every day, they have to be chased away before they can go home to sleep. How can they have the time to run around and cause trouble? They're all a bunch of foreign bastards from the border and a bunch of useless trash from the past. Most of them rely on welfare to get by, or just slack off to make a living. Once they drink, they fight and cause trouble everywhere. 2 days ago, there were a few robbers who even killed people. The situation is not small. Hey, Oka, why aren't you saying anything? Is everything calm on your side? Among the people here, the only one who did not go to clean up was probably Oka, who was still working under For's hut. Today, he was the latest to arrive. There was cement dust on the sleeves and trousers of his suit. It was impossible that he was volunteering at the construction site. His cold and gloomy appearance had not changed. When he heard Weno's question, he only said indifferently, "There are not many people who dare to come here and cause trouble, but there are more and more drug dealers. There are also people who resell medicine. I heard that there are people causing trouble in the pharmaceutical factory." "Yes, I heard that someone wanted to cause trouble, but before he could enter, his leg was broken and he was dragged out. Sai, don't talk about work, don't talk about work." Oka was annoyed. He waved his hand to interrupt their conversation and raised his glass. "Drink, drink, drink. I'm a poor retired old man, but I still have to be poured swill by you guys." For a moment, his nonchalant attitude infuriated everyone. "Hey, who are you looking down on? Give me a bigger glass. Is this the attitude you should have when you're inviting people to drink? Boss, give me 2 more glasses. Unfortunately, the rare gathering was not able to last through the night as usual. Halfway through the meal, Oka received a call and left in a hurry. Some of the remaining people suggested that they change places and continue drinking. Oka was the only one who shook his head. He used his age as an excuse and did not intend to get involved. But when he left, he slowed down and quietly called his old friend. Hey, Winnow, are you well off recently? Winnow touched his head and was stunned for a long time. He quickly reacted. You're not going to borrow money again, are you? I've been watched closely recently. Lend me some. Oka pleaded helplessly. I'll return it to you next time. All right, don't tell my wife. You bastard, you said the same thing last time. Although he was helpless and unwilling, Winnow still took out his wallet. Before he could take out his money, Oka directly snatched it and stuffed the money inside into his pocket. You're using your card anyway. Why do you need change? I'll help you settle it. The old man happily waved goodbye. But after taking 2 steps, he heard Winnow's helpless voice. Hey, Oka, don't go to those places. Okay. Oka waved his hand without looking back. He did not know if he heard him. Winnow stood there and watched him leave. After a long time, he helplessly scratched his head and turned to walk to the parking lot. But when he opened his car door, he suddenly heard a roar coming from afar. The ground suddenly shook. Then thick smoke, fire, and cries slowly rose and lit up the night sky. He was stunned for a moment and ran toward the fire. Passing through the alley, he saw the car basket on the street that was blackened in the fire, and the shops on both sides were devastated. Hey, what's going on? He grabbed a stunned passerby and roared, What the hell? I don't know either. The frightened bastard was almost paralyzed on the ground. He pointed at the burning car. I was walking, and the car suddenly exploded. I really don't know. I don't know anything. The cries woke Winnow up from his daze. He looked back at the messy street and rushed up. He recognized the faces one by one and shouted Oka's name loudly. But no one responded. Only the cries of children could be heard from the thick smoke, just below the white-haired man's body. By the time Huaisha received the news and arrived at the hospital, it was already an hour later. In the corridor, the irritated men gathered together heard the approaching footsteps. When they turned around and saw the cold face, they couldn't help but straighten their bodies and bow. The greetings were endless. Huaisha looked down and glanced at the cigarettes in their hands. Put out all the cigarettes. This is the hospital. Don't embarrass yourself in the corridor. Yes. Winnow nodded frantically. Without waiting for the others to speak, he grabbed all the cigarettes in their hands one by one and crushed them. He threw them out of the window and turned around to smile at Huaisha. Huaisha shook his head and looked at Oka's wife and daughter. The woman bowed respectfully. Mr. Huaisha. No need to be so polite, Mrs. Oka. Huaisha shook his head. Where's he? The woman shook her head and looked at the ward behind her. He just came out. He hasn't woken up yet. What did the doctors say? They still need to observe him. But he's lucky. He's still alive. The woman turned around and glanced at her husband, who was sleeping in the ward. Her eyes were a little red. If he was sent a little later, I'm afraid. It's good that he's fine. Huaisha sighed and glanced at Oka's sorry state. After confirming that he was fine, his slightly gloomy expression gradually calmed down. In the end, he could only sigh helplessly. I've told you many times. You're so old. Don't hit small steel balls, no one responded. The old man's cheeky smile and begging for mercy seemed to be right in front of him. Huaisha opened his mouth and wanted to say something. After a long time, he didn't say anything. He turned around and left. When he stood at the entrance of the hospital, he saw the American homeless man squatting next to the fire hydrant. It's not us. Lawrence raised his hands innocently. Yu Dongri is in charge of the current situation. Without his permission, no one dares to mess around. Then who is it? Huaisha asked. Lawrence's expression became helpless. We can't be the scapegoat every time something happens, right? What else can we do? Huaisha tapped the cigarette box coldly, and the lighter spun between her fingers. 3 people died, 8 were injured, and an entire street was destroyed because of this. A child lost his mother, and my subordinate is still lying in the hospital being rescued. Then, you came to tell me that it wasn't us. Lawrence, if it's not you, it must be someone else. If you don't know, I can call you Dongri and ask. Anyway, I want a name. He raised his eyes and looked at the man in front of him. He told him seriously a name. Being stared at by those dark eyes, Lawrence actually began to feel a chill on the back of his neck. After being stunned for a moment, he sighed helplessly. Give me some time. 3 hours. Half an hour. Huaisher said. You can move faster. I'll wait for you. Before he finished speaking, Lawrence disappeared from where he stood. 20 minutes later, the homeless man returned. A guy who was already badly mutilated threw a person in front of him. As if he couldn't feel the pain of his broken limbs, the guy was still smiling foolishly. His eyes were blurred, and he was immersed in some dream. What is this? Huaisher flipped the person on the ground over with his foot. He asked knowingly, a local product of Canaan? Lawrence sighed. This is the guy who put the bomb in the car. A lunatic who went crazy from taking drugs. He didn't run far at all. He was still injecting himself. His brain was damaged. I couldn't get anything out of him. So, Huaisher glanced at his watch. You still have 9 minutes. You can keep me in suspense for a while. I have the patience. Lawrence rolled his eyes and raised his hands in surrender. He didn't delay any longer. Psychic. Chapter 986. The Psychic Society. Huaisher should have been enlightened, or perhaps it was like thunder in his ears, but unfortunately, he had never heard of it at all. There were too many illegal organizations in the realm, so many that the rancher alone took up hundreds of pages of the catalog. Moreover, each illegal organization had at least several aliases and different names, and there were even serious cases of overlapping names between each other. As a result, Huaisher had never heard of the other organizations, except for the first few and the ones with the most obvious characteristics. But in fact, most of the illegal organizations and orders were almost all useless, including the one who had come to Donbua to cause trouble now. It was just a phone call, and 10 minutes later, all the information on the Psychic Society was sent to Huaisher's mailbox. An underground organization that roamed between the borders basically had no characteristics other than pretending to be mysterious, extracting the property of ignorant believers, and engaging in the smuggling of relics and illegal excavation of hell. They had done a little of everything that the Astronomy Society didn't allow them to do, but they weren't good at any of them. They had done almost everything without a bottom line, but none of them were outstanding. The internal organization claimed to worship the truth of the soul. From this point of view, they might be believers of the Pied Piper, but in fact they couldn't reach the edge of the element of destruction at all. At best, they were at the level of the periphery of the periphery of the periphery. There were probably hundreds of members, but he didn't know the leader, and there wasn't much other information. It wasn't because they were mysterious, but because the leaders changed too frequently and too quickly, and this lousy organization had no influence at all, so it wasn't worth paying attention to at all. Now, such a bunch of useless people had actually come to downtown Donbua. After Huaisher finished reading the information, he was so angry that he almost laughed. What on earth had he done to make them look down on him so much? Find out. Huaisher waved her hand and tossed the information to the hut in the forest. Where did they come from? How did they get in? Who did they find? Where are they staying? How many people are there? And how many people are involved? Where is the headquarters? How many branches there are? And how many members are involved? Find out everything. Understood. Little Hut in the woods nodded crisply, put away the information, and turned to leave. It was just that before he left, he turned around to say something, but when he saw Huaisher lost in thought, he froze for a moment, slowed down his movements, and gently closed the door for him. Soon, Huaisher returned to reality from his contemplation. He looked up at the city outside the window. Danbo gradually became noisy. He knew what the hut in the woods was trying to say. Even if there were 10 spiritual natures together, would they be a match for Huaisher, let alone one spiritual natures? They were nothing more than pawns. The real mastermind was still hiding behind the scenes, hiding in a place that couldn't see the light of day, We can't slack off because of this. But this was the most laughable thing. When you choose to stand upright under the sun, you will become a target for those in the dark. As long as you weren't paying attention, any Tom, Dick, or Harry could step on you. Something must have gone wrong. There shouldn't be such a logic in this world. Fleischer looked out of the window expressionlessly at the places where the lights couldn't illuminate. After a long time, he retracted his gaze. At the same time, in contrast to the peaceful Dombois group, angry roars could be heard from the old houses in the old town. A teacup was smashed to the ground. "Are you crazy, Jean Tion?" The old man angrily asked the smoking man. "What are you doing? You caused an explosion without my permission? Why are you panicking?" "I'm just spreading a little chaos." "Isn't this just pouring oil on your fire?" The head priest of the spiritual natures calmly flicked the ash from his cigarette. "If it weren't for me, that informant would probably be standing in front of the paper effigy right now. You wouldn't be here throwing a tantrum at me. Can't you handle the informant a little more discreetly? Why did you have to blow things up? Apart from attracting the attention of the authorities, what else can you do?" The old man was furious. He coldly looked at his companion in front of him. "The higher-ups sent you to assist me, not to cause trouble for me. Mr. William, the origin substance you provide every day isn't enough to sustain the sacred artifact. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to go out and find resources ourselves." Jean Tion's smile disappeared. "Although we've cooperated with the Wanderer Alliance for so long, we can't delay the internal affairs of the spiritual natures because of you. Otherwise, why would I play with fire under the other party's nose? Since you've already taken so much money, you shouldn't care about anything else, right?" He meaningfully warned, "It's enough for us to do our own things well." The corners of William's eyes twitched. For the first time, he felt that things were gradually getting out of his control. Perhaps he shouldn't have taken that money in the first place. This thought emerged in his mind, but it quickly dissipated due to the huge amount of money. "I hope so. I hope there won't be any more complications." After saying this coldly, he flicked his sleeves and left. It wasn't until he walked out of the door that he regained his usual calm and composed appearance. But for some reason, when he raised his head to look at the towering Dombois building in the distance, he felt as if a pair of cold eyes were looking down on him. He felt faintly uneasy. Not long after, this hidden worry in his heart was replaced by an even greater greed. This city, which was like a gold mine, would soon open its doors to them. Welcome freedom. A few days passed in the blink of an eye. Dombois didn't stop because of a small attack. On the contrary, it didn't stop development at all. After the completion of the street repair work, the construction continued in full swing, little by little, to accommodate the continuous influx of foreign people from all over the border. The production of the pharmaceutical factory also didn't have any interruptions, distributing the medicine to all parts of Asia. In other places, there were more pharmaceutical factories operating day and night, until the hope of the future was delivered to everyone's hands. In the formerly empty port, huge ships came and went every day, and heavy oars were sent to the mountains along the railway. Pillars of thick smoke rose day and night to meet the needs of smelting. The surging thick smoke turned into thick clouds. Under the blowing of the sea breeze, they surged toward the depths of the mountains. Soon, they slowly shrank under the pressure changes created by the scholar's law. After the exhaust gas, which had been heavily filtered, combined with the dust core, it quickly absorbed the water vapor in the sea breeze, turning into heavy mist and light rain. Under the illumination of the rainbow light in the mist, the sand-like metal particles were mixed in the mist, shining brightly. In the core of the mountains, there was an entire mountain peak stained with the color of steel. Scholars wearing respirators strolled in the mountains, holding detection instruments in their hands, repeatedly confirming the readings on them, and sighing in amazement. It can actually reverse the absorption of harmful particles in the exhaust gas through the metal composition. The technical thinking of the foundry is indeed different from the present. It's just that, using waste to restrain pollution, I really don't know what to say. This little metal composition is not even 1/1000th of the smelting results, and it's still in the recyclable range. With a little effort, it can reduce the pollution by 40%. What else do you want? Get to work quickly. The supervisor in the monitoring center rolled his eyes. That's why you interns are so ignorant. The wastewater treatment area needs to be tested again later. Hurry up, or you'll have to work overtime at night. Is there overtime pay? Are you kidding? Do you think this is the military bureau? Laughter came from the channel. This is celestial genealogy, my friend. Everyone works for their dreams, and it's common to die from overwork. You still want money? F***. I should have gone to the Continuation Institute. It's true that the Continuation Institute never works overtime, but they don't get off work, okay? Stop bullshitting and get to work, get to work. For Dombois, it was still an ordinary day. And in the buildings in the mountains, there was a new visitor. Oda Motors, Hakusha Corporation, Urashima Machinery Manufacturing, Onjo Electric, Kawakami Heavy Industries, Octagon Group, Edo Electrochemical Industry Group. Most of the representatives of the Ingjo Manufacturing Group gathered in the conference room of Dombois Industries. The cooperation meeting held by the Ministry of Economy and Industry was held as scheduled. Even the lazy Huai sure couldn't be absent from such a large-scale cooperation meeting. He could only sit among a group of middle-aged and elderly people who were several times older than him, to show his seriousness. Of course, the specific cooperation certainly couldn't be finalized during the short meeting. It would take a long time for all parties to communicate and try. Here, at most, everyone was just meeting each other and expressing their intentions. But shortly after the meeting began, the visitors seemed to have discussed it in advance. After understanding the specific details, they straightforwardly put forward a large number of orders. Such a direct attitude was completely different from the implicit tradition of the Ingzhou people. The strong intention and enthusiasm for cooperation surprised Huai Shi. However, the way they advanced and retreated together made him surprised, and, at the same time, he faintly smelled something unexpected. The reaction of Freeman, the scholar who really presided over the operation of Dombois, also confirmed his guess. As Isaac's deputy for many years, Freeman had always been the actual operator of the assets of the various departments in the ivory tower. He had always been accurate in his position and had never overstepped his authority. But for such a major decision, he didn't even look at Huai Shi's opinion and rejected it. Thank you for your enthusiasm, but in the short term, Dombois Smelting doesn't have the productivity to accept this batch of orders. Freeman said, if you can consider batches, we can discuss in detail later. As if they had expected this, the leaders looked at each other and made a new proposal. We can assist in production and buy patents and rights from you. If it works, this number of orders is not a concern, right? Freeman still shook his head. Sorry, we don't have the consideration and need to expand production for the time being. The market is ever-changing, and this opportunity is hard to come by. Please reconsider. We'll consider it. Freeman smiled and calmly resolved this matter. Then, he moved on to the next topic. What followed was a long period of garbage time. The two sides wasted their saliva on some trivial matters, but there was no possibility of reaching a consensus and cooperation. It was as if they were just politely coming over and had little interest in other aspects of cooperation. During the lunch meeting, he finally had a short meeting with Huai Shi. Chapter 987. Before this, Huai Shi had already consulted and understood the relevant matters. Now, of course, he did not feel that this was a good thing. What was involved now was the essential contradiction between supply and demand. In the ever-changing market, the position of both the supply and demand side would often change according to the situation and changes in the situation. Both sides were destined to have constant friction and competition over the right to speak. In short, who was the boss? Equality and win-win was just a fairy tale to trick children. In real business, losing the right to speak was tantamount to being trampled on. Whether the other party brought a win-win or plunder, there would be no chance to resist. Now, most of Dombois Smelting's production was in the smelting base in Anfang district, and it could not handle such a large supply demand. All the participating groups had joined together, using this huge order as a bargaining chip to request to enter the game. On the bright side, they could expand their operations and earn money together. But what if they had other intentions? This would inevitably cause Huaishi's control over Donbua smelting to weaken, and at the same time, Donbua might gradually lose its bargaining power in the market. Although that kind of future was farther away than catching a cold or getting lung cancer, it was still necessary to be cautious. This was a consideration between short-term and long-term development. Both options had their pros and cons, but Freeman was suspicious. This was just the beginning. The other party might have other plans. Otherwise, why did he give so much money to the strategy department every year? Then I'll reject it. Huaisher played with the lighter in his hand and replied calmly, "Don't feel pity, Mr. Freeman. Not everyone can eat meat from Donbua's pot." Although it wasn't strange for him to make such a decision, based on Freeman's understanding of Huaisher, if he were to give up on such a large fortune and profit, he would definitely feel the pinch for a long time. He didn't expect him to make such an easy decision. For a moment, it was inevitable that he was stunned. "What's wrong?" Huaisher asked. "It may be offensive to say this, but I really thought you would hesitate for a long time." "Ha ha ha, Mr. Freeman, you're right. If it was something else, I would definitely feel the pinch for such a large sum of money. To be honest, whenever I miss out on Metatron's discount season or Hell's $0 purchase in the Collection of Sins, I'll be heartbroken for a long time." Huaisher smiled. But this is different from those things. That smile was incomparably calm, without any reluctance, causing Freeman to be slightly stunned. "Although everyone thinks that all of this came from me, I've never treated this place as my private property, and I don't feel at ease. Because without other people, I wouldn't have been able to do anything," he said. "There are more things that make me who I am, The ancestors of the Utopia, the unreserved support from the Ivory Tower, the protection from the Book of Destiny, and the guidance from Tangi, as well as the support and trust from all the Beastmen." Huaisher knew that he wasn't the only one who had made all of this. On the contrary, there were too many people to thank. Now that there were results, how could he feel that all of this was achieved through his own efforts? "You have to think of more people, Mr. Freeman." Huaisher said, "They deserve better. Are you sure you won't consider it?" Freeman seriously fulfilled his duties as a consultant and explained all the pros and cons to Huaisher. After all, it's such a large sum of money. With this money in the account, Donbua's financial situation will definitely improve a lot, and the current infrastructure will not be stretched too thin. Moreover, the Ivory Tower isn't necessarily afraid of them. It's just a business struggle. We don't lack experience and success. If necessary, we can definitely sweep them out of the game. If we refuse, the local manufacturing industry in Ingzhou may join forces to boycott us. There's no need to think about it anymore. It's just a temporary embarrassment. If there's any greatest strength I have, it must be that I'm especially good at enduring hardship, right? Since we're destined to have a glorious future, why should we gamble now?" Huaisher shook his head and flatly refused. "The future is with me, Mr. Freeman. Let them go. The future is with me." Freeman pushed his glasses and laughed. "This sentence is worth a drink. Then why don't you come to my house for a meal next time?" Huaisher suggested. "Recently, Mount Tiango sent me a batch of new wine. The taste is very good. Is there whiskey?" "Only a few bottles of ordinary goods." Huaisher quickly had an idea. "But that's easy. I'll go back and get a few bottles of Russell's collection as compensation for everyone's overtime pay." "Ah, this," Freeman was stunned. "What? Are you afraid that he'll make things difficult for you?" "No, please take a few more bottles. The principal owes too much overtime pay." The two of them looked at each other and laughed. It was decided. Huaisher did not participate in the afternoon meeting. It was meaningless anyway. It was better to return to Donbua Group and continue to slack off. However, in the evening, there was an unexpected visitor. It was from the looming hall in the capital, Nan Zhongchang, who was in charge of all the ascendants in the capital. Under the dim light of the setting sun, an old man in an Ingzhou robe sat opposite Huaisher with a warm smile. "Mr. Huaisher, how have you been?" Huaisher's pen paused for a moment, and the idea of the design of Tianke was interrupted. He raised his eyes and looked over. He simply put the pen aside and asked straightforwardly, "Why are you here, Mr. Nan Nan?" He did not have the habit of playing tricks with the old foxes of the looming hall. It was best to be straightforward. It was the stupidest to play tricks with this old bastard who grew up in dirty water. Moreover, he did not intend to give any promises and guarantees without the discussion of the consultant. "I think you should know." Nan Nan smiled calmly. "You seem to be dissatisfied with the way of cooperation, but please don't misunderstand. We just want to establish common interests with Donbua." In this way, he did not care to admit that the discussion in the morning was his doing. But other than the looming hall where the ministers gathered, who else had such great influence to mobilize those giant enterprises located in various parts of Yingzhou to unite? Huaishur had already expected this. To be honest, on the issue of how to treat Donbua, we have also had many internal disagreements. But no matter what, we are not willing to let the conflict be aroused and cause displeasure between the two sides. Nan Nan said honestly, in comparison, a situation where both sides benefit is the best. We hope to deepen our relationship with Donbua, and we also hope to have greater interest with you. You don't have to think of us as so dirty. Besides, with the increasing volume of celestial genealogy today, we are not willing to be enemies with it easily. Why can't we become friends, Mr. Huaishur? He said, "I can guarantee that this will be a win-win situation." The two sides were honest with each other. Donbua won the order, and the manufacturers got the supply. Jointly operating and maintaining, forming a deeper cooperative relationship, and winning the foundation for further cooperation in the future. If things could develop as Nan Nan said, it would indeed be a win-win situation. Huaishur's expression was still cold, and he just asked, "I have no other choice except for a win-win situation, right?" "We came with the idea of cooperation," Nan Nan reiterated. "If you are willing to accept our goodwill, time will prove everything. In fact, we don't need anything to prove anything." Huaishur shook his head. Since it's a cooperation, there should be a basis for cooperation and a margin for non-cooperation. Waving the flag of goodwill, regardless of other people's consent, and forcibly inserting into other people's territory to win the so-called friendship and trust. "Mr. Nan Nan, this is not the principle of cooperation." Huaishur looked at the old man in front of him and asked doubtfully, "Did you confuse Donbua and Yoshihara? We don't have kabuki here." He didn't mind cooperation. In fact, as long as it involved Donbua's livelihood and future, he didn't mind making more compromises in some insignificant places. But now Looming Hall was seeking the so-called cooperation with such a posture. They even reached out and wanted to interfere with Donbua's lifeline. They even wanted to eat large pieces of meat. "Why? You're so sure of me." "It seems that you still have some misunderstandings about us, but it doesn't matter." Nan Nan stood up regretfully, but he was not angry. He still replied with a smile, "Looming Hall's goodwill will be reserved for you. No matter when you need cooperation, we will respond. I hope that you can change your mind at the meeting next week." "I'll think about it." Huaishur nodded, pressed the phone, and asked his secretary, Yuan, to send the guest out. Would he think about it? It would be strange if he would think about it. Not only that, Huaishur even suspected that Donbua's abnormality these days might be caused by Looming Hall. Anyway, there had to be a target to blame. Why not choose one he hated? Moreover, if the other party really had any ulterior motives, they would definitely take further action. There was no need to worry about not being able to catch the horse's foot. After leaving Nan Nan, Huaishur didn't do much work. Instead, he took out his mobile phone and began to play games. Then he waited until 7 o'clock and got off work on time. It was impossible to work overtime. He was so happy to be lazy. However, when he walked to the hall on the first floor, he heard a faint noise outside. Outside the door, there were more than a dozen people holding up signs and shouting something inside. "Freedom. We want freedom. We refuse to be oppressed. We refuse to work in sweatshops. Everyone's Donbua will be built by everyone." The slogans were shouted more and more exaggeratedly, which made Huaishir almost think that he had done something that angered the heavens and the people. Not far away, the security guards stopped a few people from entering. After seeing Huaishir walk out, they shouted Huaishir's name and raised the information in their hands to come over. "What do you do?" Huaishir turned around in confusion and looked at Yuan Yuan. "Are they here to collect TV fees? We don't seem to have installed cable TV, right?" "No, they're from the Wanderers Alliance of Freedom," Yuan Yuan replied. "They've come here several times these days, saying that they want to see you, teacher. It's all about some unimportant things." Huaishir frowned. He had some impression of that so-called alliance. It seemed to be an organization of unique beastmen who wandered between the various borders, claiming that their purpose was to liberate all hybrids and seek a free future. But in fact, they were all bark and no bite. They only shouted fiercely. If they had some achievements, they wouldn't have to wait until Huaishir came to Dambwa. Their bottom wasn't very clean either. They didn't have the courage to fight for power outside. Instead, there were many bad stories of them squeezing their compatriots from inside. Since Dambwa was established, there was basically no market for this kind of organization. However, Huaishir didn't expect that they would come to Dambwa again. "What do they do?" Huaishir asked. It was rare that the girl, who had always paid attention to dignity and bearing, showed a look of disdain. They said that they represent the majority of the citizens to fight for the power they deserve. They asked Dambwa to form a city council. They want to represent everyone, supervise the production of the medicine, and participate in the operation of Dambwa. After hearing this, Huaishir was stunned for a long time and sincerely praised. "It sounds really good. It's like living in a dream." If he had soaked in the bathhouse for less than 2 minutes, he wouldn't have poured so much water into his brain. At the door, the old man William saw Huaishir walking over and immediately showed a warm smile. He took the initiative to greet him and stretched out his hand. "Mr. Huaishir," that hand was grasped in the air. Right in front of him, Huaishir and Yuan Yuan brushed past without any pause. It was as if they didn't see him at all. They talked and laughed as they walked forward. From beginning to end, they didn't even glance at him. William stood in place, his smile gradually stiffening. After a long time, it was difficult to hide his ashen face. He flicked his sleeves and left. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.